Drogon soared over the charred ruins of King's Landing, his shadow dancing across broken walls and smouldering rubble. The late afternoon sun, struggling to puncture the veil of ash that had turned the sky a sickly grey, barely illuminated the twisted streets. Once a grand city boasting marble columns, bustling markets, and proud red-tiled roofs, King's Landing had been reduced to rubble. His massive wings beat in slow, thunderous intervals, stirring the ash into swirling clouds behind him, as if the city were exhaling sorrow. Upon his back, Daenerys Targaryen clung to her beloved dragon, her platinum hair matted with soot, her face streaked with tears that had dried into salty trails along her cheeks. She had come so far. From a timid girl sold into marriage to the Dothraki Khal, she had become the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, the liberator of Slavers Bay. And here she was, victor yet trembling with the defeat of the soul. The city was hers, the Iron Throne was hers, and still, a hollow ache nestled in her heart. She scanned the ruined streets, where small pockets of stone and timber still fumed with dying flames. The crows already circled in wide arcs, cawing from the parapets and rooftops left standing, waiting for the chance to pick at the remains of the dead. Yet, it was not the acrid smoke in her lungs or the fresh stench of decay that troubled her most. It was Drogon's uneasy restlessness beneath her thighs, and the sudden distance in his once fierce bond with her. They had always been connected, mind to mind, heart to heart. Drogon responded to her needs with an uncanny intuition, an almost preternatural closeness that transcended even the typical bond between rider and dragon. She had felt his fury when she was under threat, and had awakened his protective instinct when an enemy raised a spear. She had guided his flames to incinerate the ranks of slave masters, to tear open the gates of cities that had caged innocents. But now, as they glided low over the Red Keep's remains, Daenerys felt the trembling reluctance in Drogon's muscles. He did not wish to land here. He wanted to be elsewhere, anywhere but in this realm of smoking ruin. The jagged spires of the Red Keep jutted up like broken teeth, and the once majestic throne room lay in tatters. Great slabs of stone that formed the walls and rafters had crashed in heaps around the dais. The Iron Throne stood battered but intact, a twisted structure of melted swords and chipped edges. She wanted it so badly, had believed it to be the key to peace. But now her hand shook upon Drogon's spine, a dull sickness churning in her belly. He dipped a wing, drifting away from the keep without waiting for her command. She tried pressing her knees to guide him, but he growled low, deep in his enormous throat, and continued his wide circle above the city. She frowned. Drogon had never once disobeyed her with such finality. Always he had made his will known. He was no mere steed, but their aims had ultimately aligned. Now it felt as though she were a burden upon him. She could sense an unspoken longing roiling within his ancient spirit, something half wild, half mournful. It stirred in him like a storm brewing on a distant horizon, tugging him away from her and everything she had built, or destroyed. At last he angled toward the ruins of the dragon pit. Its dome collapsed long ago, and landed atop a shattered arch, shaking loose broken stones in an avalanche of debris. He settled there in a hunched coil, wings folded partially at his sides, as if trying to gather strength. Daenerys slid from his back onto a ledge and tried to stroke his smoky scales. He turned his great head away, eyes rimmed in glowing red, refusing her touch. She whispered, soothing words in High Valyrian, in Dothraki, in the common tongue, employing every gentle tone she had ever used to calm him when he was but newly freed and only half-grown. But Drogon only issued a rumbling hiss and withdrew further. A twisting panic clenched her heart. How could she lose him now? He was her last living child, the last of her dragons, the living testament to her bloodline's power. The men and women below might bend the knee, or at least tremble in fear, but Daenerys had never believed in ruling by fear alone. Hadn't she wanted love too? Drogon had given her that love unconditionally, or so she had believed. Now she watched him wrestle with an internal conflict she could not see or comprehend. She felt as though she was staring at a stranger. He bore the scars of battle, black scales crisscrossed with pale ridges where arrows or spears had struck in earlier wars. His horns curled elegantly, sharpened into deadly hooks. She admired him still, but that admiration was tinged with the terror of losing him. Night came swiftly over the ruined city, the heavy smoke darkening the twilight into a starless gloom. Torches flickered here and there along the fortress walls, revealing scurrying shapes of soldiers securing the Red Keep at her command. She remained perched with Drogon, refusing all counsel from advisors below, letting Grey Worm and the Unsullied handle the city's remains for now. If she could just coax Drogon into rest, into healing, everything might still be set right. Yet as the moon rose, a blurred, ghostly orb behind the shifting haze, Drogon unleashed a baleful roar that rattled the broken stones. Daenerys nearly fell from her perch in the force of it. Then, without warning, the dragon hurled himself into the air, wings snapping open with a gust that sent stone fragments tumbling down the hillside. Daenerys lunged, desperate to climb onto his back, but the tip of his tail lashed and knocked her aside. Stunned, she managed to cling to a broken piece of rubble before she fell further. Her body struck the stone, bruised and battered, and by the time she lifted her head, Drogon was already ascending into the blackened sky. His roar echoed off the ruin, cascading in waves of sound until it was lost in the choking dark. Daenerys screamed his name, a piercing call that throbbed in her throat. But he did not return. Above, his silhouette dimmed against the sky, becoming only a shadow among the drifting smoke. Then he was gone entirely, vanished toward the horizon like some avenging comet, leaving Daenerys alone and shaking, disbelief mingling with anguish in her very bones. Across the Seven Kingdoms, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said that the Queen's last dragon had abandoned her in disgust at the destruction of King's Landing. Others whispered that Drogon was simply wild now, that no mortal could command him. There were stories of him scorching woodlands near the Blackwater, circling mountainous passes, flying northward, always northward. Soldiers dispatched by Daenerys to track him could glean no pattern in the monstrous footprints and scorched earth he left behind. Some footprints found, some entire villages left undisturbed, as if he soared overhead ignoring them. The North braced itself under these rumors. Winterfell, newly re-established under Sansa Stark's rule, had begun repairs after the Great War against the dead. Though Sansa wore the proud mantle of a ruler mindful of her people's sufferings, she could not help but worry at the news of a rogue dragon flying across the continent. Her brother, Brandon Stark, King Bran the Broken, had departed for King's Landing only weeks ago. But with the city in turmoil, he had returned to Winterfell more swiftly than expected, carried in a modified wheelhouse that allowed safe passage over the war-torn roads. If a dragon truly roamed, what might happen to the New Order? How would the people of the North, the small folk who already shivered at the thought of Targaryen influence, react? As for Bran, though he was crowned king in the aftermath of Daenerys' descent into madness, he seemed changed yet again by his fleeting time in the capital. No crown adorned his brow now. He wore the simplest of robes, eyes distant, forever reflecting the knowledge gleaned from his visions as the three-eyed raven. Each day he sat in the Godswood beneath the ancient weirwood, lost in silent contemplation. When questioned, he would offer vague warnings about the shape of things to come. "Something stirs in the wind," he said once. "It flaps on ebon wings, searching for a purpose lost." On a cool, crisp afternoon, when the first hints of an early winter teased the edges of the air, Bran felt a tremor in his limbs. The wind rushed through the Godswood, rustling the fiery red leaves, and he closed his eyes. In the depths of his mind, he soared beyond Winterfell, beyond the valleys and mountains of the north. His consciousness expanded, bridging the gap between fields and forests with the intangible speed only a warg or greenseer could know. He smelled the pine-laden breezes of the Wolfswood, tasted the fresh water of hidden lakes, and sensed an enormous shape gliding through the skies. With each thunderous beat of those leather wings, the air rippled. Even from afar, Bran felt the current in his mind, a pulse, a primal drum that matched the heartbeat of the land. Drogon. His breath caught. The dragon was seeking something, or someone. The pain, the confusion, the swirling sense of betrayal and longing, all roiled in the beast's mind. Bran pulled back, severing the connection before Drogon could notice the prying presence. But it was too late. the spark of awareness in Drogon's consciousness flared. The ancient intelligence of the dragon recognized a watcher, a potential guide. And though distances meant little to such a bond, Bran steadied himself, gripping the arms of his wheeled chair, knowing that something monumental had shifted. Not many nights later, the people of Wintertown woke to a tumult of roars reverberating across the gray sky. A shape passed over the moon, blacker than any cloud, vast wings blotting out the starlight. Horses panicked in their stables, and farmers rushed to hide in their cellars. The city watch on Winterfell's walls lit torches and raised bows. Fear trembled in every pair of eyes, for the stories of Targaryen dragons had never been kind to the north. Within the castle, Sansa gathered as many as she could in the Great Hall, instructing them to remain calm, though her pale face betrayed the tension she fought to contain. Arya stood near one of the high windows, her hand absently resting on the hilt of a dagger. She was older now, but the lethal grace of her form remained. "So the beast has come," Arya murmured, not to anyone in particular. Ghost stood beside her, the direwolf's red eyes shining with uneasy reflection. Outside, the swirling snow drifts parted to reveal Drogon descending upon the open courtyard with a crash of claws. The heat of his body alone began to melt the frost-laden cobblestones, steam rising in ghostly wisps. Soldiers scrambled, forming a ragged line of spears and crossbows, but terror paralyzed them more effectively than any command could. Drogon opened his jaws, a furnace glow flickering in the back of his throat, yet the flame did not erupt. Instead, he let out a roar so loud that icicles broke free from ramparts high above. The massive beast folded his wings slowly, smoke curling from his nostrils. His eyes, molten gold ringed with scarlet, scanned the courtyard as if searching. Within the keep, Bran stirred. He had felt Drogon's approach. Even without summoning his green's ear vision, he sensed the call, an almost magnetic tug that he could neither ignore nor fully understand. Sansa flung the doors open, followed by Arya and a phalanx of northern guards, as they all stared in awe at the black-scaled dragon who had stolen into their fortress. Almost unconsciously, Arya gripped her dagger more tightly. A hush fell over every soul in that courtyard, the hush of mortals facing an ancient terror incarnate. Then, Bran rolled out from behind them, wheeling himself forward with steady determination. The crowd parted for him as though compelled by an invisible hand. Drogon's gaze locked onto Bran, the dragon's head tilting. A slow, deep growl rumbled in Drogon's throat. The archers quivered on the battlements, unsure whether to loose or hold. In that stillness, Bran lifted his face to Drogon, his expression calm, though a faint flutter of breath betrayed his anticipation. No words were spoken. Yet to those close enough, there was a tingling in the air, an electric sense of some powerful communion happening beyond mortal senses. Drogon let out a short snort and advanced one monstrous step toward Bran, his claws scraping the stone. Bran did not flinch. Ghost let out a low growl, but Arya placed a steadying hand on the direwolf's flank, uncertain of the magic at play here. For a moment, it seemed Drogon might strike, or release a fiery breath that would consume Bran where he sat. But instead the dragon lowered his massive head, snout inches from Bran's chest. The heat radiating from his scales was enough to make sweat bead on Bran's brow, but he remained utterly still. Then Drogon closed his eyes and exhaled a breath that washed over Bran, hot and heavy. Sansa gasped. The northern guards shuffled on their feet. Still, no blow fell. The dragon seemed to be making a choice, tasting the air around Bran, listening to something only he could hear. And Bran, in his quiet mind, saw flickers of Drogon's memories, the warmth of a mother's voice, the savage joy of flight, the heartbreak of seeing that mother descend into darkness and bloodshed. He saw the swirling shapes of old Targaryen dominion etched in the dragon's deep consciousness, half-forgotten instincts, hints of an older world. And he saw himself reflected in Drogon's fiery eyes. In that reflection, a single truth emerged, clear as dawn breaking over a frozen lake. Drogon had come to him for guidance, for a bond that promised something other than the madness that had scarred their world. When Drogon finally lifted his head, the courtyard erupted with sighs of relief and surprise. The tension bled away, replaced by a stinging wonder. Slowly, uncertainly, As if stepping into a realm he had only glimpsed in visions, Bran extended one thin hand. Drogon lowered his snout again. Bran's palm brushed the warm, scaled surface. A ripple passed through both man and beast, and the unspoken vow was forged. In the days that followed, Winterfell found itself host to a living dragon, a being not seen in the north for centuries. Words spread swiftly, and though the small folk still regarded the beast with trembling caution, they could not deny the mesmerizing sight of him taking flight at dawn, black wings cutting across a pale sky, or roosting upon the outer walls, glaring at passers-by who ventured too close. Sansa declared it too dangerous for him to remain near the stables or keep, so the outer courtyard and a portion of the old castle yard were cleared, designated as Drogon's domain. Sheep were brought from local farms to feed him, though some folks grimaced at the cost and the spectacle of a single dragon devouring entire flocks. Bran spent hours in the courtyard, mind communing with Drogon. He hardly slept. Instead, he would drift into the weirwood dreams, following Drogon's presence across the skies, linking their minds in ways that reminded him of his lessons with the three-eyed raven. Sometimes he was no longer in his own body, but rather inhabiting Drogon's vantage point, seeing the land below through brilliant draconic eyesight. The world felt sharper, vaster, every gust of wind an exhilarating sweep against scaled wings. His crippled legs meant nothing in that form. It was flight without limit, the pure rush of the predator's vantage. Yet always, he recalled himself, the memories of being Brandon Stark tethering him to humanity. The North's lords and ladies grew nervous. They whispered in corners and corridors about a Stark king, also the three-eyed raven, bonding with a dragon like a Targaryen. They worried this might provoke Daenerys' wrath, but Daenerys herself was nowhere to be seen. Raven messengers returned sporadically with scraps of word that the Mother of Dragons had sealed herself in the Red Keep, mourning her losses, preparing for something no one could guess. Her Unsullied patrolled the ruined city, trying to rebuild a semblance of order. Yet rumor held that her gaze would often linger on the horizon, as though expecting Drogon's silhouette to appear at any moment. Day by day, bitterness and heartbreak twisted in her heart, forging an anger that had no easy target. How dare her child leave her? Weeks bled into months, and winter's chill settled more firmly around Winterfell. Snow draped the ramparts, and icicles hung like spears from every parapet. In the courtyard, Drogon's presence melted patches of ground around him, creating a strange landscape of slush and mud wherever he slept. Some nights he would roar at the moon, as though calling to something far away. Bran would come to him then, placing a hand upon his scales, warging partially to soothe the dragon's distress. Those who witnessed it claimed there was a gentleness to Drogon in Bran's presence, a quiet acceptance. To the watchers on the walls, it looked as if the king in the north had tamed a black-winged fury that no other mortal could approach. Despite the grudging awe from the northern houses, tension simmered. Some men murmured that a dragon in Winterfell was a sign of ill omen, recording times when Targaryens unleashed fire on the north. Others insisted that with Daenerys far away in the south, her dragon was rightfully the property of the Iron Throne, King Bran's throne, ironically enough. But Sansa, though proud and wise, felt uneasy. She confronted Bran one evening as he sat by the hearth, his face drawn from the fatigue of constant visions. "Why is Drogon here?" she asked softly. "What does he want from you? You're not Targaryen. You never asked for a dragon's loyalty." Bran looked at his sister with the same distant gaze he gave everyone. Yet behind that gaze shimmered a faint empathy. "He's lost, Sansa," Bran answered. He felt Daenerys' rage, her heartbreak, and it tore at his bond with her. He sought something else, some anchor in this world that wouldn't lead to more ruin. Or perhaps it was the will of the old gods. Dragons are magical creatures and magic often seeks a balance. He followed that balance here. She knelt beside his chair, searching his eyes. "Do you trust him not to burn the north?" Bran smiled, a rare, slight curve of his lips. "He won't hurt us unless provoked. And I can guide him. He listens to me, like no creature ever has. Not even Hodor, not even the ravens. Drogon is old magic, older than we imagine. He knows the songs of Valyria, but also heeds the presence of the Green Seer. We are connected now. She studied him for a moment, her expression heavy with concern, then placed a hand on his arm. Be careful, Bran, she whispered. He's a dragon, and no matter how strong you are in the sight of the old gods, you're still my brother. Bran said nothing to that, only gazed into the dancing flames, perhaps seeing things beyond the flicker of the hearth. Far from Winterfell, Daenerys Targaryen paced the shattered throne room in the Red Keep. Though it was patched with fresh timber and hasty repairs, the space still bore the scars of battle. Rubble had been cleared, but black scorch marks stained the walls. The Iron Throne, once her singular obsession, seemed to mock her from its dais. She could not bring herself to sit upon it. Days turned into nights as her anger found no release. She had sacrificed so much, lost 2 dragons, lost trusted advisors, lost the love she thought she might share with Jon Snow. And now she had lost Drogon. Grey Worm, loyal as ever, observed her from a discreet distance. She had commanded him to keep order in King's Landing, but her eyes and ears among the scouts reported no sign of Drogon returning south. More pointedly, they brought whispers that the beast roosted in Winterfell under the protection of the Starks. Daenerys had raged upon hearing this, flinging a goblet of wine against the blackened wall. Rage turned to despair, then hardened back into rage. Her child was with someone else. And not just someone. Brandon Stark, the new king, the boy with powers she barely understood. In truth, she felt betrayed in a deeper sense. Drogon was meant to be an extension of her very soul, the living embodiment of her lineage. If he had chosen Bran, what did that say about her? What if she was no longer worthy? The questions gnawed at her, eroding what remained of her confidence. She found herself alone in the nights, wandering the charred battlements, eyes drifting to the starlit skies, hoping against hope that she might catch sight of Drogon's silhouette returning to her. Yet no such silhouette came. At last, she made a decision. She ordered the Unsullied to gather supplies and prepare for a journey north. If the dragon would not come to her, she would go to the dragon. And if Brandon Stark thought to keep Drogon from her, she would show him the fire and blood that still ran in Targaryen veins. She was no frightened girl to be cowed by northern snows. She was Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt, and she would not be denied her birthright. As word of Daenerys' northern march spread, Bran felt a gathering storm in his visions. The snows of winter parted in his mind, revealing the swirl of warlike images, armies marching, banners clashing in the icy wind, the shrieks of men and women as dragonfire ignited the skies. He shuddered at the sight, yet was resolved not to relinquish Drogon to a path of endless destruction. The people of Winterfell might remain suspicious of the dragon, but they had begun to trust Bran, to trust this new, strange bond that had kept them safe thus far. One morning, as dawn broke over the frosted battlements, Bran asked Sansa to gather the major lords of the north in the Great Hall. They convened, stamping snow from their boots, eyes still thick with sleep. Torches flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows upon the long oak tables. Bran was brought to the center, where all could see him. He spoke in a voice quiet yet firm. "We are on the edge of a new conflict," he said, pausing to let the hush deepen. "Daenerys Targaryen has begun her march north, seeking to reclaim Drogon. If she arrives in force, it will mean war at our doorstep. I will not allow the north to burn again. I ask you all to trust me, to trust that Drogon is no longer a threat to us, and that I can guide him." No. A skeptical murmur swept the hall. Lord Glover, standing near the front, voiced what many thought. "Your Grace, we saw what the Dragon Queen did to King's Landing. We know she wields a fury we can't match, even if we muster every fighting man in the north. If that beast decides to turn on us, we're due." Bran inclined his head. "I understand your fear, but that fear will not save us from her approach. I intend to parley with Daenerys before she crosses the neck. Drogon and I will fly to meet her." A collective gasp. Sansa stared at him, eyes wide. "Fly," she whispered. "Bran, you can't be serious. You haven't even physically mounted Drogon. You've just been communing with him from the ground. And Bran lowered his gaze. I feel his mind. I've taken flight in my visions. He knows me as his rider. Now I must embrace that role fully. If I can talk to Daenerys in neutral territory, perhaps we can avoid a second tragedy, and if not? He paused, letting the consequence remain unspoken. If not, winter might run red with fire and blood. Arya took a step forward, her jaw set. Let me go with you. Bran gave her a faint, bittersweet smile. I need you here, Arya. You and Sansa must keep the North united if anything happens to me. If things go ill, the realm will need your strength and cunning. Arya looked as though she wanted to protest, but Sansa placed a hand gently on her shoulder. The elder sister's eyes glimmered with concern. Are you sure there's no other way? She asked, her voice soft. Bran's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. It must be me. Drogon responds to me. If I can show Daenerys that we have no desire to keep him from her, perhaps we can reach an understanding, but I will not allow him to go back to mindless destruction. So it was decided. The following morn, the courtyard buzzed with anxious excitement. Bran was wheeled out toward Drogon, who lay in a patch of melted snow near the stables. The beast blinked slowly, watching the assembly of northern lords and guards. His black scales glinted in the early rays of the sun. Steam curled up around him, painting the air with tendrils of silver mist. Bran was helped from his chair onto a raised platform that had been hastily constructed against the yard's outer wall, bringing him level with Drogon's shoulder. Time seemed to slow. Bran placed a trembling hand upon Drogon's flank, feeling the hot pulse of the dragon's life. He closed his eyes, focusing on the bond, letting his mind meld. Within a heartbeat, he found himself balanced between two worlds, the meager limitation of his mortal limbs and the vast power of Drogon's form. Carefully, as if urging a great stallion forward for the first time, he coaxed Drogon to kneel. The onlookers gasped as the dragon lowered his shoulder, making it easier for Bran to climb. With the assistance of a guard, Bran hoisted himself onto the ridges of Drogon's back, settling into the curve between two of the dragon's spines, where the scale plating was thicker. A hush fell over the courtyard. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ghost prowled near Arya's feet, whining softly. Sansa stood at the edge of the platform, tears threatening as she watched her brother prepare to ride a creature of legend. Then Bran met Sansa's gaze, nodding with solemn reassurance. She mouthed words of encouragement, though her lips trembled. Bran leaned forward, pressing a hand to Drogon's scales in a silent command. The dragon's massive muscles tensed. In a flurry of movement, Drogon unfurled his wings and leapt skyward, causing a maelstrom of wind that battered the watchers below. Bran's stomach lurched as they rose, higher and higher, the courtyard shrinking beneath them. Snow-laden rooftops and the thick walls of Winterfell blurred into a patchwork of grey and white. For a moment he felt dizzy, unaccustomed to the raw physical force. But he steadied himself in the bond, sending calm through the link he shared with Drogon. Up they soared, the frigid wind whipping at Bran's face. He had dreamed of flight in ravens' bodies, had soared in visions, but never had he felt this raw, unbridled energy. This was the power of a dragon. He felt the beating of Drogon's heart, as though it were his own, a thunderous drum that resonated in every inch of his frail body. The cold stung his cheeks, made his eyes water. But there was also a sense of soaring freedom that momentarily eclipsed all thoughts of war and parley. They flew south, guided by the faint sense of Daenerys' approach that Bran gleaned from distant reports, and from the subtle webs of knowledge the Weirwood network provided. Hours passed, the ground beneath them shifting from snowy plains to frosted forests. Ice-laden rivers snaked below them, reflecting the sky's steely glow. Drogon's powerful strokes made short work of the distance, carrying them over the neck before day's end. Bran guided Drogon to land in a wide clearing near an old watchtower that had once marked the boundary between the north and the Riverlands. The structure was long abandoned, its stones crumbling and overgrown with dead vines. Here, amid bare trees and stiff grasses, Bran waited. Night fell, and stars pricked the sky. Bran realized he had no tent, no supplies. Only the warmth of the dragon curled protectively around him. He drifted in a light doze, lulled by the rhythmic rumble of Drogon's breathing and the starlit hush. Visions played at the edge of his mind, the swirl of dragons, the swirl of ravens, cryptic echoes of the past. He saw the shadow of Daenerys crossing the plains with her army, her hair whiter than the moonlight, her heart a torrent of longing and fury. He saw glimpses of Winterfell at peace, of Arya training in the courtyard, of Sansa reading letters by candlelight. Then, far on the horizon, the dawn began to lighten the sky into a greyish hue. They arrived at midday, the Unsullied marching in tight columns beneath tattered banners of the silver dragon emblem. Fewer in number than before, but still a formidable force. Daenerys rode at the front, her posture regal, though her eyes betrayed a deep weariness. She halted her forces at the edge of the clearing. Before her lay Drogon, and upon Drogon's back perched Bran, silent and watchful. The army stirred uneasily. They had seen dragons before, but never expected to see their own queen's beast under the command of another. Grey Worm lifted a hand, signaling the Unsullied to form ranks. The crisp shuffle of spears and shields cut through the hush. Daenerys dismounted and approached slowly, her breath visible in the chilly air. She wore a heavy cloak of black fur lined with silver thread, and though her face was pale, her steps never wavered. Bran inclined his head in silent greeting. Drogon chuffed, exhaling a hot breath that melted a patch of snow. The dragon's eyes fixed upon Daenerys with a swirl of recognition and conflict, as though part of him yearned to rush forward to his old rider, and another part remained bound to his newfound bond with Bran. Daenerys stopped a dozen paces away. Her gloved hands twitched at her sides, fists curling and uncurling. "You have my dragon," she said, voice tight with an emotion she barely controlled. Bran's calm gaze fell upon her. "Drogon is no one's possession, Your Grace. He came to me. He's free to choose." Her jaw tightened, a spark of anger flickering in her eyes. Dragons do not simply choose. They are bound by blood and magic to the rider who nurtured them. She glanced at Drogon, remembering how she had cradled him as a hatchling. Her tone softened slightly, though sorrow laced it like an undertow of grief. "Drogon and I were connected. It was never my intent to lose him." Bran's voice was gentle, though it carried the weight of unearthly insight. "He felt your despair. He tasted the devastation in King's Landing. He saw your heartbreak, your isolation, your fury. He flew away, seeking something he couldn't find with you anymore." Daenerys' eyes glistened. She took a step closer, ignoring the subtle bristle of the Unsullied behind her, ignoring the swirl of tension in the air. "I only did what I thought I must," she whispered, as if half in confession. "I wanted to break the wheel. I wanted to free the people. But the city burned, and all that was left was ashes." She turned her face aside, a tremor passing over her features. "I never meant to drive him away." A silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken tragedies they both knew too well. Bran inhaled slowly, feeling Drogon's vast presence behind him. The dragon's heartbeat thrummed like a distant drum, mesmerizing and powerful. "He still loves you," Bran said quietly. "That cannot simply vanish. But he's conflicted. Dragons understand the world in ways we can't. They sense deeper truths, deeper paths. Drogon felt the break in your bond, the moment the love was overshadowed by fear and anger. Now." She closed her eyes, gathering her courage. "Will he return to me?" She dared to open them, swallowing her pride enough to display the raw need in her question. Bran looked down, collecting his thoughts. He felt the tug of Drogon's emotions, picking out the threads that entwined him and Daenerys. He turned back to her. "That depends on you as much as on him. If you can let go of the anger, if you can truly seek to protect rather than destroy, he might let you back into his heart." Daenerys nodded, tears now visible on her lashes. Then her mouth drew into a line, and the old steel glinted in her eyes. "But you, Bran, you are the one riding in him now. What becomes of that? Will you stand aside if he chooses me?" "Nay." Bran considered, hearing the echoes of the old gods in his mind, hearing the swirl of dragon wings in an endless sky. "I do not wish to rule dragons. I wish to guide him, protect him from being used as a weapon of unbridled wrath. I accepted this bond because he needed a calm mind, a stable anchor." He paused, letting the meaning sink in. But if you can be that anchor, truly, then I will step aside. Drogon should be with the one he calls mother. However, if we sense that you intend to use him for destruction again, here Bran's tone turned surprisingly firm. I will not let that happen. The North will not burn to satisfy anyone's vengeance. None. A flicker of indignation flashed in Daenerys' expression, but she swallowed it, remembering all too vividly the pain of losing Drogon and the horrors of King's Landing. She glanced at the ranks of Unsullied behind her. They stood ready, unflinching, silent. Grey Worm's face was impassive, but she knew he too harbored anger for the countless slights and losses. Yet anger had led them all here. And if she continued down that path, would she lose Drogon forever? Finally, she stepped forward another pace, her gaze shifting to Drogon's eyes. I am so sorry, she whispered, voice trembling with years of regret. I failed you. I let my fury and heartbreak guide me, and I know you felt it. If there is any chance we can mend what's broken, please. Drogon let out a low rumble, neither approving nor rejecting. Bran sensed the swirl of old affection in the dragon's thoughts, overshadowed by a wariness. A hush fell over the clearing as everyone waited for the next moment to unfold. Then Bran carefully, painstakingly, climbed down from Drogon's back, using the ridges of scales as handholds. His feet touched the snow and he swayed slightly before regaining his balance. Leaning on the side of Drogon's flank, he nodded at Daenerys, inviting her to approach. She moved with measured steps, the crunch of snow underfoot echoing in the silence. She halted mere inches from Drogon's claw, gazing up at the massive black shape of her dragon. Her lips parted, and tears froze at the corners of her eyes. Slowly, she reached out a hand. Drogon's head lowered, breath steaming. His nostrils flared, recalling her scent. Then, in one deliberate motion, he pressed his snout against her outstretched palm. The connection brought tears freely down her cheeks. She ran her fingers along the scales of his jaw, reacquainting herself with the familiar pattern. A shaky laugh escaped her, half relief, half sob. Behind them, the Unsullied remained at attention, uncertain whether to rejoice or maintain caution. On the other side, Bran stood quietly, sensing the renewed bond like a tenuous silver thread. He felt Drogon's hesitation mixed with hopeful curiosity. Daenerys closed her eyes, leaning her brow against the dragon's snout, murmuring words in Valyrian, words of apology, of longing, of unbreakable love. Drogon rumbled again, this time softer, a sound that resonated with warmth and acceptance. At length, Daenerys turned to Bran, wiping the tears from her face. Her voice was calmer, almost reverent. He still loves me, she said, wonder and relief woven together. Thank you, Bran. Bran inclined his head. He was about to respond when the hush of the moment was shattered by the sound of distant horns. Both armies snapped to alert, scanning the far tree line. A second horn blast echoed, closer this time. From the wood line emerged a small troop of riders bearing a banner, the direwolf of House Stark. At their head rode a figure with red hair and a grim expression, Sansa Stark. Arya was beside her, cloak billowing behind her wiry frame, and a retinue of northern cavalry followed. They had made a swift approach, having deduced Bran's whereabouts from the flurry of ravens and the watchers at Moat Cailin. Their arrival injected a new tension into the clearing. The Unsullied bristled, forming a defensive posture. The northern riders spread out, a shield wall of horses and spears. For a moment, it looked as though violence might erupt. But Daenerys stepped forward, raising her arms in a gesture of restraint. Sansa halted her riders, scanning the scene. Daenerys, her hand resting upon Drogon's scales, Bran standing beside them, calm and intact. The tension hung like a blade suspended on a single thread. Sansa's voice carried across the space. We came because we feared for our king. We heard rumors of your approach, Daenerys Targaryen. We didn't expect this. Bran interceded quickly. Peace, Sansa. We're on the verge of an understanding. Daenerys met Sansa's gaze, and for a moment they were two women who had fought tooth and nail for their survival in this broken realm. They had endured losses that would shatter anyone else. They had learned to navigate the thickets of power. Slowly, Daenerys lowered her arms, letting her cloak drift in the chilly wind. I have no desire to shed more blood, Lady Stark. I came only to see if I could mend what was broken with Drogon. No. Arya surveyed the tension with a critical eye, hand close to the hilt of her dagger. She held her peace, though, seeing Bran's composure. Sansa took a moment to choose her words carefully. Then perhaps we can all return to Winterfell. We have much to discuss, though. So it was that the uneasy parties traveled north together. Drogon flew overhead, watchful, occasionally drifting away to hunt before returning to keep pace with the marching column. The Unsullied and Northern soldiers eyed each other warily, but there were no skirmishes. Within Bran's mind, the tension remained a constant hum. He sensed that Daenerys' sorrow had softened her anger, but he also sensed the fierce pride that might flare again if provoked. He took solace in the fact that at least for now, the realm was spared another cataclysmic confrontation. Upon returning to Winterfell, Daenerys was granted guest chambers, and the Unsullied were quartered in the outlying areas, kept under watch by northern guards. An uneasy peace settled over the fortress. Drogon roosted near the old training yard, a living furnace amid the drifting snow. The days grew short, the nights long and frigid, as the deeper winter set in. Yet, inside Winterfell's walls, a fragile alliance was taking shape. Bran and Daenerys spent time each day with Drogon, forging a threefold bond that mixed the older mother-child relationship with Bran's calmer, mystical link. Under the watchful eyes of the Northern Lords, Daenerys knelt before Bran in the Great Hall, acknowledging that he was the king chosen by the Lords of Westeros. In return, Bran acknowledged her rightful claim to be the last Targaryen of her line, the mother of dragons, deserving of respect, though not worship. A sense of measured acceptance spread through the ranks, albeit slowly. Some still viewed Daenerys with suspicion, remembering the tales of King's Landing. Others saw her quiet transformation as proof she was no longer the same conqueror who burned a city. One bitterly cold morning, as the sun struggled through low-lying clouds, Daenerys found Bran in the Godswood. He sat beneath the heart tree, snow clinging to its red leaves, its trunk twisting up like pale sinew. She approached quietly, noticing the hush that lingered around him. His eyes were distant, half-closed, lost in a realm beyond mortal sight. For a long moment, she stood there, uncertain. Then he spoke, his voice a bare whisper. "I see fragments, echoes of the future, pieces of the past. Sometimes they blur together." Daenerys let out a gentle sigh, stepping closer. "I know something of visions," she said. "In the House of the Undying, I saw illusions and truths, glimpses of what might be. But your power is greater than anything I witnessed." His gaze shifted to her, as though focusing through a haze. "Drogon's presence is changing things. The bond he and I share, the bond you share with him, it resonates in the Weirwood network. Magic stirs across the land." She crouched beside him, fingertips trailing in the snow. "What does that mean for us, for Westeros?" "It means there's a chance for renewal, if we can avoid repeating the same cycles of vengeance," Bran said softly. "It means the old gods might welcome a new age of magic and unity, or we might destroy ourselves again if we choose violence." Daenerys studied his face, illuminated by the pale winter light. Despite his youth, the lines of weariness and wisdom etched across his features made him appear ancient. "I don't want more war," she said, voice trembling with sincerity. "I wanted to break the wheel, not grind the realm to dust, but everything I did, it all led to that horror in King's Landing. How do I atone for it?" Bran's expression softened. "Perhaps by proving that you can lead without fire and blood. By showing compassion and restraint even when your enemies test you." He paused, reading her face. "The realm still has many who may not welcome your presence. But if Drogon remains a peaceful guardian instead of a weapon, hearts may change in time." She lowered her gaze, remembering the taste of power, the allure of absolute dominance as she soared over King's Landing. That memory was tainted now, stained with regret. Yet it still thrummed in her veins, the desire to be recognized, to be loved, To be the queen she once dreamed she could be. I will try, she murmured. They rose from that conversation with a sort of mutual respect, unspoken yet understood. Day by day, Daenerys earned the cautious acceptance of Winterfell's denizens. She helped in the kitchens, surprising the cooks with her willingness to learn northern recipes. She visited the sick in the infirmary, offering words of solace. Though many stared in awe at her silver hair and Targaryen beauty, the rumors of her earlier wrath kept them at arm's length. Even so, each small act of kindness chipped away at the fear. Meanwhile, Drogon remained a striking presence, sometimes vanishing for days on hunting excursions, only to return and warm the courtyards with his fiery breath. Children would peer from behind barrels and crates, giggling nervously whenever he passed overhead. Though timid at first, some grew bolder, leaving small offerings of cured meats or carved trinkets. Daenerys would watch these interactions with a softening heart. She recalled the days in Meereen, when the children shrank in terror from her dragons. Here, she saw a flicker of hope, that maybe, just maybe, man and dragon could coexist without tyranny. One early dusk, a sharp cry echoed across Winterfell's ramparts. Horns blared in a panicked alarm. Soldiers rushed to the walls, scanning the horizon for a threat. Bran and Daenerys, along with Sansa and Arya, converged in the courtyard. They found Grey Worm and a contingent of unsullied tents at the gates. A ragged man on horseback was leaning in the saddle, half dead from cold and exhaustion. He carried a torn banner with the Lannister lion. With trembling lips, he gasped out the news. A force of disaffected Lannister loyalists and sellswords, angered by the destruction of King's Landing, had gathered under a rogue commander in the Riverlands. They had seized towns, declared open rebellion against both the Starks and Daenerys Targaryen. Word was that they blamed the Targaryen queen for the downfall of their city and intended to avenge the ashes of the capital. The news fell like a hammer blow. Bran's expression turned grave. Sansa exhaled sharply, her eyes flashing with urgency. Daenerys felt a pang of dread. She knew all too well the cycle of vengeance and bloodshed. It seemed no matter how far she traveled, war always followed. In an emergency council that night, they debated the best response. The North was not eager to march its forces south in the dead of winter. The Riverlands might suffer immensely if a new war erupted amidst the cold months. Yet letting the rebellion fester would only incite further bloodshed. Arya, always direct, proposed a stealth mission to eliminate the leadership of the rebels. Grey Worm favored a swift, crushing attack to demonstrate no tolerance for insurrection. Sansa leaned toward negotiation, hoping to quell bloodshed before it escalated. But Bran, after a prolonged silence, ended the debate with a quiet statement. Daenerys and I will go. With Drogon. An astonished hush followed. Sansa opened her mouth to object, but Bran continued. Well, fly. We can reach them faster than any army. If they truly seek revenge, let them see the face of the one they blame. Let them speak their grievances. Let us attempt to broker peace before swords are drawn. None. Grey Worm bristled at the suggestion. They will not respect a parley. They hate the queen. They might try to kill her on sight. A ghost of a smile touched Daenerys' lips. They can try, but Drogon's presence will remind them of what they face if they choose violence. She let out a slow breath. I don't want more blood on my hands. If it can be solved with words, I must try. Reluctantly, the council agreed. Dawn saw Daenerys and Bran, both atop Drogon, a precarious arrangement that took careful maneuvering. Daenerys sat forward, with Bran secured behind her, each bracing against the dragon's ridges. Despite all that had transpired, the sensation of Drogon beneath her once again brought a surge of emotion to Daenerys' chest. Yet the presence of Bran's calm mind, guiding Drogon as well, steadied her. They soared south. The ground blurred, winter forests and icy rivers passing beneath them. Midway through the afternoon they spotted a column of refugees fleeing a village near the Trident, the smell of smoke on the air. Rebels had apparently torched homes in a show of defiance. Drogon descended, stirring ash from the scorched buildings. The rebels, a ragtag force of a few hundred, spotted the dragon's approach and scrambled into defensive positions. Some aimed crossbows, others brandished pikes. Daenerys and Bran landed in the smoking ruins of the village square. Drogon spread his wings, letting out a roar that shook the charred timbers of half-collapsed houses. Fear rippled through the rebel ranks. A man who appeared to be their leader, wearing a battered Lannister surcoat, stepped forward. His face was twisted with rage. "You come to burn the rest of us, Targaryen," he shouted. "You've not had your fill." Daenerys, with her heart pounding, forced herself to show no fear. She raised her voice, firm yet resonant. "I have not come to burn, I have come to parley." The man spat on the ground. "King's Landing was my home. You destroyed it. My family died in the flames, my daughter." His voice cracked, and tears glistened in his eyes. The crossbowmen behind him tensed. "Why should we parley with the butcher?" Daenerys felt tears threatening at her own eyes. She gazed at the ruin, remembering the horror she had unleashed. Quietly she replied, "Nothing I say can bring your loved ones back. I can only offer this. I regret the deaths more than you can know. I was consumed by grief and rage, and I failed you. I failed the realm." A stunned silence. The rebels shifted uneasily. Some of them appeared uncertain. They had expected threats, not remorse. From behind Daenerys, Bran's voice carried with a note of otherworldly authority. "She wants to make amends." Drogon, sensing the tension, growled low, but he did not lunge or breathe fire. The rebel leader's face contorted in indecision. Finally, he bellowed, "Words! What good are words to the dead? You can't bring them back." "Then, dost?" "No," Daenerys said, bowing her head. "But perhaps I can help the living. Let us end this war before more children die." For a long moment, no one moved. The man glared at her, wrestling with his hatred. At last he threw down his sword, the blade clattering on the ground. His shoulders sagged. "My daughter loved dragons," he whispered, voice trembling. "She said they were beautiful." Daenerys dismounted carefully, stepping onto the blackened ground. The crossbows followed her every move, but no arrow loosed. She approached a grief-stricken soldier with slow steps. "I can't undo what was done," she said softly. "But I can promise you that I am done with conquest. If you need help rebuilding, we will find a way to provide it. If you want justice, I can't bring the dead back, but I can at least acknowledge their suffering." None. Tears welled in the man's eyes. Whether it was forgiveness or simply exhaustion, no one could be sure. He sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. The other rebels faltered, uncertain whether to continue the fight or follow. Bran spoke, calling to them, "Lay down your arms. We can find a future without more death." Some complied, dropping their weapons. Others hesitated. A few turned and fled, but the impetus for organized violence was lost. Over the next hours, Daenerys and Bran oversaw the meeting with the ragged survivors. Slowly, carefully, a fragile understanding was reached. Daenerys would cede certain southern lands to remain under self-governance for those who wished to separate from Targaryen rule, so long as they acknowledged King Bran's overarching sovereignty. In return, the rebels would disband, offering no further aggression. It was an unconventional agreement, hammered out in the ashes of a burned village with a dragon looming overhead. But it was enough to avert further slaughter. When Drogon took flight again, carrying Daenerys and Bran northward, Daenerys felt something akin to release. She had confronted the consequences of her darkest moment, and chosen not violence, but humility. The look in the soldier's eyes lingered in her mind, a painful reminder of what she had wrought. But she also felt the weight of possibility, that perhaps she could guide Drogon, and herself, toward a gentler destiny. Back in Winterfell, the winter deepened. The days were pale and short, the nights long and frigid. But beneath the blanket of snow, life stirred. The castle's forges glowed, producing new tools and arms. The storerooms were stocked with grain thanks to careful planning. And in the hearts of the people, a cautious hope flickered. If a Targaryen queen could set aside her anger, if the king-turned-greenseer could unify the realm with wisdom, maybe the scars of war would begin to heal. Drogon continued to split his time between Bran and Daenerys, as though each bond nurtured a different part of him. He would let Daenerys fly him on some days, the pair soaring over the wintry plains with an ease born of old familiarity. On others, he would settle with Bran in the Godswood, the synergy of magic around them palpable. In these moments, Bran felt echoes of the ancient Valyrian power coursing through Drogon, entwining with the old gods of the north. He saw glimpses of a future where dragons might once again flourish, not as tyrants but as protectors. He saw flickers of the past, the lost Targaryen scions, the tragedies that led to madness. One night, as snow fell in lazy drifts under a silver moon, Daenerys and Bran met on the ramparts. They stood side by side, gazing at the sleeping form of Drogon in the courtyard below. His breath rose in soft clouds, a slumbering giant. Daenerys turned to Bran, her voice barely above a whisper. "I once believed I was the only one worthy of riding him, of commanding him. That was arrogance. Your bond with him has taught me humility. For that, I thank you." Bran studied her with his fathomless eyes. "And I never believed I would ride a dragon. That was beyond my imagination, even with the powers I possess. Yet here we are." He paused, letting the hush settle over them. "It seems we needed each other." She nodded, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "What will you do now?" "I will keep guiding the realm as best I can," he said. "Perhaps we will find a way to rebuild King's Landing properly, to help the scars heal. And you?" She looked to Drogon, her heart swelling. "I will stay in Winterfell for a while if your sister allows it. Help strengthen this fragile peace. Then, who knows? Maybe I will journey to Essos, ensure that the cities I freed remain free. Maybe I'll find a new place to call home. But wherever I go, I want Drogon by my side, if he's willing." Bran nodded, sensing the truth in her desire. "He will be willing, I think, but part of him will always be bound to me as well. We share something now." Daenerys smiled, a genuine warmth that touched her eyes. "Then we'll share him, in a way. Dragon and Raven, Targaryen and Stark, forging a different future." Bran returned the smile. For a moment they stood in companionable silence, two figures shaped by war and loss, now forging an alliance built on empathy rather than conquest. Above them, the moon shone bright upon Winterfell's white-capped towers, and below them, Drogon slumbered peacefully, his dreams perhaps filled with open skies and new beginnings. In time, Daenerys would ride Drogon south again, not to conquer, but to reconcile. Some would meet her with suspicion, others with awe. Tales would spread of how the queen who burned the south made peace with the north, and even shared her dragon with the king who could walk in visions. Bards might sing of the day Drogon bowed to two riders, weaving a new tapestry of legend, one that spoke not just of fire and blood, but of the fragile, powerful choice to heal. And Bran, ever the quiet observer, would watch these stories unfold, guided by the old gods and the tapestry of fate only he could fully see. He would continue to delve into visions, tethered by the living bond he shared with Drogon. Night after night, the realm would sleep beneath the frost-laden stars, while in dreams a crippled king flew on black wings, guided by a heart full of remembrance and hope. Perhaps the world could change, Bran mused. Perhaps even dragons could seek a gentler path, and perhaps even mortals could forgive. He felt the beat of Drogon's ancient heart, steady, unbroken, forging new rhythms in the winter air. And he felt his own heart answering in kind. Thus, in the quiet hush of Winterfell, with the cold winds stilled to a gentle breeze and the moon reflecting silver upon the snow, a new chapter opened for the Seven Kingdoms, shaped by the unlikely union of a lost queen, a Greenseer king, and the dragon who chose them both. A hush fell over Winterfell in the aftermath of Bran and Daenerys' return from the Riverlands. Their success in pacifying the rebels without bloodshed was a story that traveled on the wings of ravens to every corner of the realm. Some scoffed at the idea of offering clemency to those who once raised arms. Others dared to hope this was the sign of a lasting peace. Even the cold winds that moaned through the ancient walls and frosted parapets seemed gentler. Within those walls, where men had known war after war, a quiet rumor spread. Perhaps the time of endless conflict was finally giving way to a fragile new era. Daenerys spent hours in the library each day now, poring over the old histories of the North, the records of past winters, and the genealogies of houses whose banners had rarely been seen in the South. She had always been a quick study, hungry for knowledge, And in Winterfell's trove of scrolls and tomes, she found precious clues about how to connect with the Northerners she had once intimidated with dragonfire. Her steps were cautious, her eyes thoughtful. She read of the Long Night and of House Stark's ancient pacts with the children of the forest. She read of the once vast forests of the north that had been carved away by time and war. Above all, she sought to understand the culture of the people whose loyalty was not won by fear, but by recognition of their hardships and pride. Sansa would occasionally join her, guiding her to certain volumes, sometimes offering curt remarks. This is about the Stark lineage. Here is an account of Lord Manderley's triumphant feast for King Aegon IV. Always polite, always watchful. They never became close friends, but the tension between them eased to a mutual respect. They both cared for Bran and the realm in their own ways. Each evening, Daenerys would sit at a table in the Great Hall, where northern lords and ladies gathered for supper. At first, her presence cast a long shadow. The memories of King's Landing's devastation lingered in the minds of even these distant watchers. But as the nights rolled on, the subdued clank of cutlery and the flicker of torchlight offered small opportunities for conversation. Lord Glover, once openly resentful, asked about her time in Essos. Lady Mormont's cousin, one of the few remaining Mormonts, requested advice on training new soldiers after so many had fallen in the War for the Dawn. Sometimes Daenerys offered stories of her youth, how she had traveled across the Red Waste, how she survived among the Dothraki, how she had once been so certain destiny marked her for the Iron Throne. There was no pride in her voice now, only a calm reflection, a sense that destiny was not always what one expected. Bran listened quietly from his place at the high table, flanked by Sansa, who ruled the North's day-to-day affairs in her brother's name. Arya sometimes graced these gatherings, though she often came and went like a breeze, more at ease out on the ramparts or in the wintry fields beyond the castle. Grey Worm stood sentinel in a corner, still carrying the stoic composure of the Unsullied. Over time, the hall's hush lightened into real conversation. Even if mistrust still flickered in the corners of certain eyes, people came to see Daenerys as a woman shaped by tragedy, not merely the living embodiment of dragonfire. Outside, the winter deepened. Snow piled in high drifts along the outer walls. Frozen rills formed on the sides of buildings, icicles dangling like white knives from rooftops. Sometimes the wind cut so bitterly that sentries had to thaw their beards in front of hearth fires. Yet the hum of daily labor never ceased. Smiths forged swords, blacksmiths hammered out horseshoes and nails, and fishermen chipped away at the icy rivers to secure a meager catch. Through it all, Drogon provided a strange kind of warmth. Whenever he roared or flew overhead, the updraft scattered snow from ramparts. When he curled up to sleep, coils of his body melted wide circles in the courtyard. People began to joke that the Mother of Dragons had at least made the courtyard easier to traverse. A few even dared to approach him with chunks of salted meat, staying well back, of course, until Daenerys or Bran nodded that it was safe. Drogon would sniff at the offering, occasionally accept it, then huff warm breath that smelled of sulfur and charcoal. The longer Drogon stayed, the more the northern folk realized he was not about to ravage their lands. Children started calling him the Black Storm, a name that spread through Wintertown as a sign of awe rather than terror. Sometimes, from Bran's vantage as the three-eyed raven, he sensed a primal reverence forming around the dragon, as though the old gods themselves accepted this mighty creature's presence in their snows. He caught glimpses of ravens spiraling over Drogon's sleeping form, cawing in patterns that, to Bran's deeper sight, resonated with meaning. Yet tensions remained, if more quietly. Men from the Vale who had come as occasional visitors to treat with the Starks regarded the Unsullied with suspicion. Letters from King's Landing reported pockets of anarchy persisting among the poorer districts, left over from the sack of the city and the power vacuum that followed. Some of Cersei's former loyalists still nursed resentments, if not open rebellions, then simmering grudges that could ignite at any time. Rebuilding the realm would be a long, arduous process. Amid these trials, Bran delved ever deeper into his mystical bond with Drogon. Night after night he ventured into the Godswood, shutting his eyes beneath the heart tree's crimson leaves. The moment he surrendered to the weirwood's silent call, his spirits soared. He roamed the skies in Drogon's mind, felt the wind buffet his scaled wings, glimpsed entire mountain ranges dusted in snow, felt the primal stirrings of ancient magic in every breath. It exhilarated him, but it also demanded caution. The consciousness of a dragon was immense, potent, and tinged with a predatory edge. Once, while warging into Drogon, Bran felt his own anger flare at the sight of a pack of wolves. He caught himself mid-lunge, forcing Drogon's primal instincts to recede, reminding the beast they were not hunting for sport. When he emerged from that war, beads of sweat drenched his brow, and his heart pounded as though he'd run for miles. He confided in Daenerys about these experiences. She offered quiet empathy. She, too, understood the thrill of riding Drogon, the addictive sense of absolute might in the skies. It was what had once led her astray, she said. Power is so seductive, especially when pain and fury lay coiled in one's soul. Bran admitted that the old god's vantage gave him perspective he hoped would prevent such tyranny. But the two realized they needed to maintain a careful watch on one another, and on Drogon. Neither wanted to see him become a weapon of devastation again. One evening, while the wind howled through the castle's corridors, a raven arrived bearing news from the Stormlands. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree under King Aegon Targaryen before everything fell apart, had been working to rebuild his family's ancestral seat. Apparently bandits and outlaw lords were raiding the small folk near Storm's End, taking advantage of the chaos that lingered in King's Landing's wake. Gendry's letter implored Bran for aid. Although Gendry was no longer an official lord, many of the old laws were in flux. He had enough standing and popular support in that region that the local people turned to him for leadership. He feared that if these raids persisted, the Stormlands would plunge into a state of near-civil war. Bran read the letter in silence, then passed it to Sansa and Daenerys. After a moment, Sansa frowned. Our forces are spread thin. Many men are still recuperating from the Great War, the battle with the White Walkers, and the subsequent conflicts. Not seem out of pissed at all. Daenerys traced her fingers over the script. Gendry was dear to Arya. He fought valiantly at Winterfell when the Night King came. He's always been on the side of the living. If we fail to assist him, we risk letting the Stormlands descend into chaos again. Arya, who stood near the hearth, her eyes half-lidded, spoke up. I'll go. He's my friend. There was a protective steel in her voice. I've traveled alone before, from Winterfell to King's Landing. I can do it again. Sansa raised an eyebrow. You won't stop an entire band of outlaws by yourself. Arya lifted her chin. You'd be surprised. But she softened her tone a moment later. Still, it might be better if we present a united front. The realm needs to see that the king, or at least his representatives, care about all the provinces. Daenerys exchanged a glance with Bran. We could bring Drogon. A single pass overhead might dissuade many from banditry, but we can't remain in the Stormlands indefinitely. Bran weighed the situation in thoughtful silence. He recalled the scattering of nightmares from his visions, flickers of Storm's End battered by violent storms, men with swords drawn, small folk cowering in broken huts. He saw Gendry standing in the hall of Storm's End, lacking the official vestments of a lord but radiating a Baratheon's fierce determination. Go with Arya, Bran said at last, turning to Daenerys. A short show of force might be enough to remind these outlaws that the realm is no longer lawless. I will remain here to keep the north steady, in case any new threat arises. Daenerys nodded. She felt a pang of reluctance. Her bond with Bran and Drogon was still delicate, and she feared leaving Bran to face any trouble alone. But she also sensed that she was needed in the south. I'll do it, and perhaps it will show the people that I'm not their enemy, that I seek to protect them. Sansa stood, smoothing her skirts. We can spare a small company of soldiers. The distance is far, but if you take Drogon, travel will be quicker. Arya can accompany you on horseback if she wishes, along with a few guards, at least until you find Gendry. Well. Arya tilted her head, a half smirk lighting her eyes. I'll keep up. The notion of traveling by horseback while Daenerys soared overhead was not exactly new to her. She had grown used to seeing dragons swoop through the sky since the war in the north. Besides, she knew how to slip through the land unseen if need be. 3 days later, Daenerys stood in Winterfell's courtyard, tugging on the warm gloves Sansa had provided. The morning sun glimmered on the snow, and frosty air bit at her cheeks. She patted Drogon's flank gently, feeling the comforting rumble in his massive ribs. Nearby, Arya adjusted the straps on her horse, a lean mare with a chestnut coat, as a small band of northern soldiers on their own mounts clustered behind her. Grey Worm was present, overseeing final preparations, though he himself planned to stay in Winterfell at Bran's request. Should anything threaten the castle, the unsullied commander's presence would be vital. Bran watched from the sidelines, his expression guarded. Daenerys approached him. In the hush of the courtyard, she could hear her breath come in visible puffs. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she said quietly. "Drogon and I will try to deter the bandits through presence alone. If more is needed, I'll send a raven." Bran nodded, a distant look in his eye that suggested he was already half immersed in his Greenseer visions. "Take care," he replied. "The Stormlands can be treacherous this time of year, and not only because of outlaws. Do not underestimate the storms themselves." She inclined her head. Though she had never confessed it aloud, she sometimes found Bran's all-knowing gaze both comforting and unnerving. She wanted to hug him, but that gesture felt too intimate for the role he played now, King Three-Eyed Raven ally. Instead, she touched the back of his hand in silent gratitude. He rested his slender fingers over hers, acknowledging the gesture. Then she swung herself onto Drogon's back with practiced grace. The watchers below tensed as the dragon unfurled his vast wings. A single heave of Drogon's powerful body lifted them into the sky, kicking up a whirl of snow. Daenerys felt the rush of wind tear at her hair, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, recalling the earliest days of flight in Meereen, the scorching sun on her shoulders. Now the cold stung her cheeks, and the stark white panorama below reminded her she was in a different land entirely. Yet there was also a sense of renewal, a chance to correct old mistakes through new, measured deeds. From the saddle, she glanced down to see Arya and the mounted escort racing out of the gate, hooves pounding in fresh snow. They would follow the King's Road south, while Daenerys soared above the rolling hills, scanning for signs of bandits or trouble. Somewhere in her mind she felt the faint presence of Bran, like a silver thread bridging distance, reassuring her that he could still sense Drogon. She did not question this subtle magic. Instead, she urged Drogon southward, determined to do what she could for Gendry and the people under threat. The journey took them over mountain passes and frozen lakes, then gradually into milder climates where the snow softened to slush and the wind carried the smell of salt from the narrow sea. Daenerys kept Drogon in the air until her muscles ached from maintaining her seat, unwilling to risk a camp in uncertain territory. When at last she saw the Stormlands' craggy coastline rising in the distance, battered by crashing waves and dark clouds, she recognized the region's famous weather. Gusts ripped across Drogon's path, forcing him to adjust his wings. Sheets of rain replaced the gentle snows, drenching Daenerys' cloak until she felt the chill in her bones. She found a rocky plateau to land on, not far from an old watchtower that signaled the approach to Storm's End. Dismounting, she searched for a small sheltered nook beneath a rocky overhang, coaxing Drogon to curl up around her. His body heat was the only thing keeping her from shivering uncontrollably in the damp cold. She didn't sleep well that night. Thunder boomed across the sky, lightning flashed in searing arcs. Drogon would occasionally lift his head, nostrils flaring, a deep rumble in his throat. It felt like the storms themselves were testing their resolve. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a trickle, and the wind had died to a restless breeze. Daenerys coaxed Drogon back into the air, relieved to see the watery sunlight filter through the ragged clouds. Far below, she spied Arya and the soldiers picking their way along a forest trail, mud splattering the flanks of their mounts. Through the uncertain weather, they pressed on, at last glimpsing Storm's End in the distance, a great fortress perched on the edge of tumultuous seas. The castle walls stood high and forbidding, tested by centuries of storms. Though the black banners of House Baratheon no longer flew as they once did, the battered ramparts seemed as stalwart as ever. As Daenerys swooped closer, figures on the walls appeared, pointing at the sky. She guided Drogon into a wide circle overhead, ensuring they recognized his presence without swooping too low and causing panic. A horn blast resonated from the parapets, echoing across the cliffs. The gates opened, and a group of riders emerged, leading Daenerys to believe that Gendry was coming out to greet her. She spotted Arya, having hurried her pace, coming from another direction with the northern escort. Daenerys decided to set down in a clearing near the castle's approach, a space large enough for Drogon to land without destroying trees or farmland. When Drogon's claws crunched onto the sodden earth, steaming breath curling from his nostrils, a group of men in mismatched armor watched warily from a distance. Gendry rode forward, halting his horse. He looked much as Daenerys remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair plastered by the drizzle, his features cut with the rugged lines of a blacksmith's toil. He wore no crown, no shining plate, just a sturdy leather jerkin with a hammer strapped across his back, and homage to his father, Robert Baratheon, though Gendry wielded it for survival rather than tyranny. "Your Grace," Gendry said, inclining his head. The last time they had crossed paths, Daenerys had still been proclaiming herself queen. He didn't appear resentful, but his respect was cautious. "Thank you for coming." Daenerys slid off Drogon, landing in a light squelch of mud. She smoothed her cloak, meeting his gaze. "Gendry, I came as soon as I received your letter. How dire is the situation?" Enone." Before he could answer, Arya trotted up, her horse breathing heavily from the final gallop. She slid off with agile ease, boots splattering mud. "Well met, Gendry." She paused, eyes flicking over him, then she gave a nod. "You look like you haven't slept." He let out a weary chuckle, relief shining in his eyes at the sight of her. "I've been trying to keep some semblance of order. We have small pockets of outlaws raiding the outer villages, taking advantage of the weak hold on power here. Storm's End is still a symbol, but I don't have enough men to patrol all the villages. The Golden Company is gone, the Lannisters are scattered, and the local lords bicker among themselves about who truly holds authority." Daenerys' brow furrowed. "We can help with that. Drogon's presence alone might dissuade some from continuing their raids. But if they're entrenched, we'll need a more direct approach." "Noni." Arya brushed wet hair from her face. "We should start by meeting with any local lords willing to negotiate. We can't chase ghosts in these storms. Better to gather them here and warn them that order is being restored." Gendry agreed, gesturing for them to follow him into the castle. Daenerys considered leaving Drogon outside the walls, but a single glance at the looming storm clouds and the uncertain looks of Gendry's men made her think better of it. They found a wide courtyard inside the outer gates that had ample room for Drogon, though the stone underfoot looked dangerously slick. She instructed him, in gentle Valyrian, to remain at rest, letting him huddle near an empty stable. Horses within whinnied in terror, but soon quieted under the watchful eyes of the stable hands. Storm's End, though battered by time and disrepair, still had a certain somber grandeur. The great hall was not as large as Winterfell's, but its walls were thick stone, and its towering windows looked out over the roiling sea. Wind rattled the shutters and the smell of salt permeated every corner. Gendry led them in, his footsteps echoing on the flagstones. The hall was sparsely furnished. It was clear that resources had been stretched thin to feed people through the winter. What tapestries remained were worn, faded, portraying the old stags of Baratheon lineage in a style that recalled Robert's more lavish era. While servants hurried to bring mulled wine and whatever simple fare they could assemble. Stew, dark bread, salted fish. Gendry outlined the region's turmoil. Several local lords, once sworn to House Baratheon, found themselves directionless after Robert died. Stannis fled, and Renly was killed. Some had supported Cersei in her final stand, others had tried to remain neutral, and some now felt wholly abandoned by the Iron Throne. With the Targaryen ascendancy ending in tragedy at King's Landing, they saw little reason to bow to Daenerys or any new monarch. The bandits roaming the roads were often deserters from half a dozen armies, men who had lost families or fortunes, and saw no future but pillage. Arya sipped her wine, a deep frown creasing her forehead. "There must be hundreds of them. This is more than a few roaming criminals. It's practically an insurgent force." Gendry nodded. "They're scattered, but they coordinate raids. We suspect they have contacts among certain landed knights who secretly fund them. We've captured a handful, but fear and hunger push many small folk to join the outlaws rather than starve." Daenerys exchanged a look with Arya. We need to show that legitimate governance still exists, that there's a better way. She turned back to Gendry, who would still heed the name Baratheon. Even if not officially recognized as a lord, you carry the blood. Some might rally behind you if they believed in your leadership. Gendry ran a hand through his damp hair. Some do, but they're not enough to form an army without support. I'm just a bastard who got legitimized. I don't have the old lord's unwavering loyalty. Arya studied him, her eyes glinting. You have us, at least for now. Between a dragon and a Stark, maybe we can gather enough power, or at least enough fear, to quell the outlaws. She paused. And it's time we send word to the capital, or what's left of it, to reaffirm that King Bran backs you here in the Stormlands. That might sway a few more lords. Daenerys leaned back in her chair, the meager torchlight dancing on her silver hair. Very well. I'll draft a letter to Winterfell, and to the Riverlands, letting them know that we stand with the Stormlands against any who would destabilize the realm. We can guarantee a large force will come, but the threat of a united front might buy us time. Nakind. Gendry's gaze flickered to the windows, where thunder rumbled in the distance. We should move quickly. The bandits are opportunists. If they see a well-organized stand, they might scatter. But if we delay, they'll grow bold. Thus began a tense few days at Storm's End. Daenerys made frequent flights on Drogon's back, circling the nearby roads and villages, letting the bandits see the great black dragon overhead. She refrained from burning anything, seeking only to intimidate. Arya led small patrols of the northern soldiers through hamlets and farms, capturing any outlaws foolhardy enough to challenge them. They brought back a handful of ringleaders, whom Gendry put under guard in Storm's End's dungeon, more a series of dank cells beneath the fortress, cold and dripping with seawater. Interrogations revealed that at least 2 minor houses had given coin and supplies to the rebels, hoping to carve out a power base. In the Great Hall, Daenerys held an informal court, summoning the lords and knights suspected of collusion. They arrived sullen, eyes darting at the unsullied guard who had accompanied her from the north, though only a token contingent. Arya stood by Daenerys' side, silent and watchful, a small presence radiating lethal promise. Gendry took a seat off to the side, hammer resting at his feet, exuding a quiet authority. Sometimes the lords tried to challenge Daenerys, right to judge them, citing old laws and referencing the Targaryen downfall. She would answer calmly, reminding them that King Bran the Broken reigned now, and she spoke with his authority, alongside her own authority as the mother of dragons. To drive the point home, Drogon would often let out a piercing roar from the courtyard, the sound reverberating through the thick walls and rattling the stained glass windows. More than once, lords who had started with bluster found themselves stammering halfway through a protest. Still, Daenerys refrained from executions unless a crime was undeniably proven and severe enough. Murder, repeated acts of banditry. Even then, she hesitated, weighed the evidence, and delivered sentences with a sober mien. Some were banished to join the Night's Watch, though that order itself was in disarray. Others faced imprisonment. A few were executed swiftly, but only when no doubt remained regarding their violent treachery. Each time she passed a sentence of death, Daenerys felt the weight of the memories from King's Landing. She tried to keep her voice steady, her eyes clear, showing no sign of the anguish that still gnawed at her from within. In the evenings, she took solitary walks along Storm's End's curtain wall, gazing at the merciless sea smashing against the cliffs. She would think of her father, the Mad King, and wonder if his shadow loomed still within her. She thought of her mother, who died giving birth to her in the storm that had once battered these same shores. Perhaps some cosmic thread connected her to this place. Stormborn, she whispered to the wind. Am I finally home or am I lost? She found herself missing Bran's calm presence, the quiet knowledge in his voice that seemed to steady her. She missed the flicker of trust in Sansa's eyes, and grey worms measured footsteps in the corridors. Most of all, a part of her missed the sense of warmth that had begun to bloom in Winterfell. A place where she could slowly show that she was no longer the conqueror who set a city aflame. Arya joined her occasionally on these nighttime walks, the 2 women stepping along the rain-slicked battlements. They rarely spoke of personal matters, but sometimes Arya would remark on the scars left by the storms, or share a memory of her father, Eddard Stark. and how he once visited Storm's End in his youth alongside Robert Baratheon. On rare occasions, Arya would lightly mention Gendry, a faint softness coloring her usually sharp tone. Daenerys glimpsed an affection there that Arya tried to hide behind casual words. But the conversation never went too deep. Arya was fiercely private. She kept her vulnerabilities guarded, even more so than Daenerys. At last, the outlaws ceased their raids. Word spread that the Targaryen queen, or ex-queen, as some still called her, had come south with a dragon, accompanied by a Stark who wielded lethal skill in the king's favor. Some of the more mercenary among them fled to the hills, or rumored pirate dens along the coast. Others surrendered, throwing themselves on Gendry's mercy. The region was not fully tamed. Such chaos lingered like an infection, but at least the open pillaging had subsided. Now came the task of forging a stable structure to keep the peace. Letters from Winterfell indicated that Bran supported Gendry taking an official role. Not quite a Lord Paramount, since that title was in question, yet a caretaker or warden in the Stormlands until the realm's governance could be sorted more formally. Daenerys delivered the news to Gendry in the presence of the local lords, sealing it with her personal authority on behalf of the king. Many of the lords grumbled, but accepted it, especially once Arya's calm stare passed over them, and Daenerys quietly reminded them of Drogon's watchful presence. Some nights later, after a modest feast to celebrate the new peace, Daenerys found herself sitting on a bench in the courtyard, listening to the sigh of the sea and the shifting of Drogon's great bulk nearby. The sky had cleared, revealing a scattering of stars overhead. She didn't hear footsteps approach, but she sensed Arya's presence as the younger woman dropped onto the bench beside her. "Thought you'd be in bed," Arya commented, leaning forward, elbows on her knees. Daenerys studied the slick cobblestones underfoot. "Sleep doesn't come easily these days. Too many thoughts, too many memories." Arya nodded. She seemed pensive, her normally guarded face softer in the starlight. "I can relate. Nights can be the worst or the best, depending on what haunts you." A brief silence passed. Daenerys felt the weight of the question rising in her chest. "Arya, do you think it's possible for people to ever truly trust me again after King's Landing?" Arya exhaled slowly. "Depends on which people. Sansa might never trust you the way she trusts me or Bran. But she can see you're trying. The North remembers its grudges, but it also respects actions taken to protect the realm. Down here, in the Stormlands, you're winning them over little by little. People appreciate a leader who punishes criminals but spares those who deserve mercy." "Wise." Daenerys reached out, running her hand along the bench's rough stone edge. "I know I'll never undo what I did, but maybe I can keep building something better." Arya's grey eyes flicked to Drogon's silhouette, the dragon's outline lit by faint torchlight. "Just keep him from burning any more cities. That will help." Daenerys let out a shaky laugh. "Yes, that's definitely the plan." Arya rose to her feet, starlight silvering the edges of her hair. "I think you're on the right path, and I'm grateful you came when Gendry asked. He needed you, and you were here. That speaks louder than any claim to a throne." The admission warmed Daenerys' chest. Arya offered a slight nod, then slipped away into the shadows. Daenerys lingered a while longer, gazing at Drogon. His slow, rhythmic breathing reminded her of the days when he was young, curled by her side in the deserts of Essos. But he was fully grown now, just as she was. And they had both learned through pain and loss what it meant to hold power, and what it meant to wield it carefully. A fortnight later, Daenerys decided it was time to return to Winterfell. She had done what she could in the Stormlands. Gendry was recognized as the caretaker of Storm's End, the bandits had scattered, and the local lords had grudgingly acknowledged her authority as Bran's emissary. To keep the region stable, Gendry agreed to hold regular councils with the lesser knights and landholders, distributing resources for the winter under guidelines she and Arya devised. It was a start, but there was much more work to be done. Arya chose to remain behind for a time. She and Gendry had matters to discuss, and Daenerys suspected that, beneath Arya's guarded exterior, she might be exploring a bond that had long been hinted at. Daenerys did not pry. She simply offered a small smile when Arya told her she wouldn't be traveling back just yet. "Don't worry," Arya had said. "I'll keep an eye on things here, and if you need me in the north, I'll come." So Daenerys departed alone on Drogon's back, carrying with her only a small pack of supplies and letters for Bran and Sansa. The flight north felt different this time. The storms parted in her wake, and the weather, though still cold, was not as harsh as before. She pushed Drogon to cover as many leagues as possible each day, pausing briefly in the Crownlands to rest. From above she saw King's Landing in the distance, its charred remains still partially in ruins. Smoke rose from small fires, and she glimpsed new scaffolding where repairs were underway. A pang of guilt tightened her chest. She could have landed there, attempted to help further with the rebuilding. But she knew her presence might bring mixed reactions. Better to coordinate that effort through letters and messengers for now. She guided Drogon around the city, the dragon letting out a low rumble as if sensing her unease. Then they continued north, over the plains and into snow-laden forests. When she spotted the grey walls of Winterfell, her heart unexpectedly stirred. She felt relief, a sense of coming home in a way she had never quite felt in the sprawling palaces of Essos. Winterfell's austere towers and thick walls stood as a bastion of resilience in a brutal land. As Drogon descended into the courtyard, men shouted in surprise, though their alarm quickly gave way to recognition. She saw Sansa appear on the battlements, one hand shielding her eyes against the afternoon glare, auburn hair loose around her shoulders. Nearby stood Bran in his wheeled chair, guided by a guard, his expression unreadable. With a controlled drop, Drogon landed, snow swirling in drifts around his black scales. Daenerys slid off, her limbs stiff from the long flight. She spotted Grey Worm at the edge of the courtyard, and he inclined his head, wearing the faintest hint of a smile that only she would catch. It comforted her more than she cared to admit. Sansa approached, her fur-lined cloak dragging lightly in the snow. "Welcome back," she said. Her voice was as cool as the northern wind, but it held a note of sincerity. "I hear your mission was a success." Daenerys let out a tired breath. "We settled the Stormlands enough that Gendry can hold them. The bandits won't be a major threat for now." Sansa nodded, thoughtful. "That's good news. The realm needs stability. You must be cold and hungry. We'll have a meal prepared. You can share the details." Daenerys bowed her head in thanks. "I appreciate it." As Sansa gave orders for the cooks to prepare hot soup and bread, Daenerys turned to Bran. He remained near the steps leading into the great hall, his eyes distant, yet a subtle smile curved his lips. She drew closer, noticing that his fingers hovered over the armrests of his chair as if impatient. "I felt you return," Bran said softly, his voice carrying that eerie calm. "Drogon too. I'm glad you're safe." There was an intimacy in his words that took Daenerys by surprise. It echoed in the quiet hush of the courtyard, the swirl of snow around them. She knelt beside his chair so their eyes were level. "I'm glad to see you again," she said, meaning it more deeply than she could express. She felt a swirl of emotions, gratitude, relief, a yearning for acceptance that she only half understood. "Thank you for trusting me to handle matters in the Stormlands." He placed a hand lightly on hers. Though his touch was soft, there was a firmness to his gaze. "We share Drogon," he said, "and we share a vision for a realm that does not drown in blood. I trusted you because I knew your heart was no longer bent on destruction." Daenerys' throat tightened, memory stirring of the screams in King's Landing. But she swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll do everything I can to keep it that way." They lingered a moment, letting the swirl of wind fill the silence. Then a guard cleared his throat, reminding them they were in a busy courtyard. Bran's attendant began pushing his chair toward the interior corridors, and Daenerys stood to follow. The warmth of the great hearths inside enveloped her. Servants rushed about, removing her wet cloak, offering her a basin of warm water to wash the dirt and cold from her hands. Sansa appeared again, guiding her to the great hall, where a steaming meal awaited. The smell of broth and roasted onions nearly made her knees buckle with gratitude. She ate beside Bran, exchanging stories of what had transpired in the Stormlands. As the evening wore on, Sansa asked pointed questions about the local lords, the structure of Gendry's new governance, and the potential reaction of other regions. Daenerys answered as best she could, noting each fact she'd learned. Though the conversation was businesslike, she sensed an undertone of respect in Sansa's curiosity. They were no longer adversaries. even if they might never be confidants. After the meal, Bran asked Daenerys to join him in the Godswood. Sansa looked on curiously, but did not object. The hour was late, and the pale moon cast an otherworldly glow on the castle's walls. Snow crunched underfoot as Daenerys accompanied Bran's attendant, who pushed his wheeled chair across wooden planks set over the snow. The Godswood welcomed them with a hush of ancient branches, the heart tree's red leaves rustling in a faint breeze. Torches were placed in sconces near the entrance, their light flickering on the gnarled trunk. When they reached the heart tree, Bran asked his attendant to step away. Daenerys stood quietly, the crisp air filling her lungs, the swirl of half-remembered prayers in her mind. She had never quite understood the old gods, but here in this place she felt their presence. Bran closed his eyes, drawing a slow breath. "Much has changed since you left for the Stormlands," he said. "Some of it you know through letters, but there are deeper currents stirring. I've had visions of the far north, beyond the wall, where the magic of the children of the forest still lingers." Daenerys listened intently. The mere mention of the White Walkers and the Great War made her skin prickle. Another threat. Bran's voice was measured. "Not the same as the Night King. He is gone, but the land itself is shifting. The old gods are waking in ways we haven't seen for generations. Birds fly in strange patterns. Herds of elk and direwolves roam near the edges of abandoned castles. There's a sense of renewal, but also unpredictability." Now Sanulaya. Daenerys' heart pounded. "What does it mean for the realm?" "I'm not entirely sure," Bran admitted. "Magic is returning, or changing. Perhaps Drogon's presence, combined with the final defeat of the Walkers, has opened a new chapter. We must tread carefully. The realm is still fragile. People may fear any sign of the supernatural, connecting it to the terrors of the past." Daenerys thought of her dragons, once the harbingers of Targaryen dominion, and of Drogon, now forging a gentler path with her and Bran. "So we watch and guide as best we can." Bran gazed at the heart tree, the moonlight catching the carved face in the trunk, a face that seemed older than time. "Yes, and we remain wary of those who might exploit these changes. There are always those who seek power for themselves. If magic blooms anew, it can be harnessed by those with dark intentions." She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "We stand together then." He turned his eyes to her, and a subtle warmth touched them. "We do." That night, as Daenerys tried to sleep in her chambers, she couldn't shake the sense of something vast and unknowable unfolding in the far north, a tapestry of magic beyond even her experiences with dragons. She found herself longing for the straightforward challenge of outlaws in the Stormlands, where one could brandish a sword or dragonfire and solve the immediate crisis. This felt more nebulous, more profound. Yet in that uncertainty lay a strange hope too. If magic was not solely a force of ice and death, perhaps it held new possibilities for healing the land, for forging alliances once unthinkable. Over the next weeks, life in Winterfell returned to its routines, yet a subtle tension underlay every day's chores and councils. Ravens arrived from various regions, reporting fresh attempts at rebuilding. Some lords requested grain shipments. Others offered alliances. A handful of them openly invited Daenerys to visit, hoping her dragon might inspire loyalty or fear among their vassals. She refused most of these invitations, not wanting to flaunt Drogon like a trophy. Instead, she asked Sansa to organize a more careful approach. Send envoys, gather more information. A single show of force might help quell an uprising, but traveling as a roaming warlord queen would only resurrect old nightmares. Bran, meanwhile, spent longer hours in the Godswood. Daenerys occasionally joined him, watching from a respectful distance as he slipped into the weirwood dream. Sometimes she tried to sense Drogon's consciousness from afar, the way Bran seemed able to do. She managed only faint impressions, echoes of his mood, faint glimpses of what he saw. She realized then the depth of Bran's bond, not just with Drogon, but with the land and its secrets. One morning, just after dawn, Bran requested Daenerys' presence in the Godswood. The sky was a pale grey, streaked with the promise of fresh snow. She arrived to find him motionless beneath the heart tree. As she approached, his eyes fluttered open, and he breathed out a cloud of vapor in the cold air. "I saw something," he murmured, voice still carrying the distant echo of a vision. "A settlement near the Shivering Sea, far to the northeast. People are in peril. A series of harsh storms have trapped them. Food is running low. It's not a large town, just a small fishing village and a few scattered homesteads. They've sent no raven. Perhaps they have none to send. But winter has them in its grip. They might not survive unless help arrives." Daenerys' mind raced. "No wonder we received no word. That region is remote, nearly beyond the usual trade routes." Bran lowered his gaze. "I sense their desperation. They gather driftwood on the frozen shore, trying to keep warm. If we don't intervene, I fear many will starve or freeze to death." She set her jaw. "We can't ignore them. How can we help? Sansa can spare some stores of grain, though the north itself is always pressed for supplies. But I believe if Drogon flies them there, he could deliver a shipment of food and medicine quickly. A smaller group could accompany you on horseback, though the roads are treacherous." He paused. "It's your choice. I won't force you or Drogon to risk it." Daenerys understood the implicit challenge. This was no mere quest for glory. It was an effort to save people whose survival might otherwise go unnoticed by the lords and ladies in their stone keeps. Once she had traveled across the Red Waste to protect her followers, had marched an army across Slaver's Bay to free the oppressed. Here was a chance to uphold that same spirit in a land she had once only dreamed of conquering. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "We'll need to prepare. I'll carry as many supplies as Drogon can manage. Others can follow with sleds or carts, but they'll take longer. I can at least bring immediate relief." Bran offered a slight nod, relief evident in his eyes. "Thank you. I'll help arrange the supplies with Sansa. Time is of the essence." Lana. It was a feat of hurried organization, but within a day, Daenerys found herself overseeing a whirlwind of activity in Winterfell's courtyard. Barrels of grain and dried meats, bundles of furs and small casks of herbs were gathered. Master Ebrose, who had traveled from the citadel to counsel King Bran, contributed some prepared remedies for frostbite and pneumonia and bear. The biggest challenge was figuring out how to secure all of it on Drogon's back. Carpenters hastily fashioned a wooden harness that could be strapped along his spine, distributing the weight more evenly. Daenerys knew it wouldn't be comfortable for him, but if anyone could handle the burden, it was her dragon. Sansa expressed concern about the mission's risks, fretting about the storms along the Shivering Sea, the potential for accidents. "We can't lose you or Drogon," she murmured. But Daenerys only smiled softly. "We won't be lost. We've flown through storms before." Then, more gently, she added, "Thank you for worrying." At last, Daenerys climbed atop Drogon, feeling the added heft of the supplies shifting behind her. Grey Worm and a small detachment of Unsullied, along with northern soldiers, planned to follow on the ground, though it would take them considerably longer. If all went well, Daenerys would make it to the settlement with enough emergency provisions to stave off disaster until the slower convoy arrived. At the gates, Bran and Sansa watched her prepare for departure. Bran lifted his hand in a gesture of farewell. Daenerys bent low over Drogon's neck. The dragon tensed, muscles rippling. With a roar that scattered snow from the courtyard, he surged upward. The harness straps creaked under the strain but held. Daenerys' breath caught as they soared over the walls. She circled once, glimpsing the small figures below, then pointed Drogon's head toward the northeast. The land unfolded beneath them in a quilt of white. Frost-laced forests, frozen rivers and jagged hills passed in a blur. Daenerys kept a vigilant eye on the harness, making sure no part of the cargo threatened to slip free. The air grew colder the farther they flew, until her cheeks and lips stung from the wind. She wore layers of fur, but as well as Drogon's body heat radiating through the saddle that truly kept her from freezing. Occasionally, she saw shapes moving below, herds of elk, scattered groups of travelers braving the roads, and once, what she thought might be a direwolf pack streaking across a frosty meadow. She wondered if they sensed the dragon overhead. As they pressed on, clouds gathered. The wind picked up, and snow began to swirl around them. Visibility shrank, forcing Daenerys to guide Drogon in lower arcs, weaving between hills and ridges, so she could track landmarks. Several times she had to land, letting Drogon rest while she oriented herself, scanning the horizon. On the second day of travel, they reached the edge of a vast, icy coastline. The shivering sea stretched out, grey and inhospitable, dotted with chunks of ice. Waves crashed against frozen beaches, forming jagged sheets of slush. Overhead, gulls and storm petrels wheeled, their cries lost in the roar of the wind. She had never seen a place so stark. No palm trees or rolling green fields, just a realm of frost and stone, battered by the endless lash of winter. The settlement Bran had described was tucked into a small bay, sheltered somewhat by high cliffs. Daenerys spotted thin plumes of smoke from huts that seemed precariously close to collapse under the weight of snow. Drafty wooden walls and thatched roofs looked ill-suited for such severe conditions. She urged Drogon closer, half afraid of what she might find. As they swept in, she saw huddled figures in ragged furs dash outside, pointing at the sky. Dragons were the stuff of stories here, if that. Daenerys took care to circle slowly, letting them see that Drogon wasn't about to unleash flames on their fragile homes. She guided him to land on a stretch of rocky ground near the largest structure, perhaps a communal hall. Snow churned around his claws as he touched down. Daenerys could practically feel the people's panic and awe from across the clearing. She raised her hands in a non-threatening gesture and slid from Drogon's back, stepping onto the frigid ground. Icy wind buffeted her cloak. She called out in the common tongue, her voice carrying above the gale. "I come to help, not to harm." No immediate answer. She took a tentative step forward. Men and women peered from behind a makeshift fence. She could see the hollow cheeks of malnutrition, the weary slump in their postures. Children gripped their parents' legs. Fear shone in their eyes like small, desperate lamps. A tall woman emerged from behind the fence. She held a spear in her chapped hands, though her stance wavered from exhaustion. Ice clung to her hair, which was braided back in a style that suggested a distant northern heritage. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice laced with suspicion and a rasp that spoke of thirst. Daenerys' breath steamed. "My name is Daenerys Targaryen. I come from Winterfell. King Bran the Broken sent me to bring food and supplies." She gestured to the harness on Drogon's back, where barrels and sacks waited. "We heard, through means of our own, that you were in dire need." The woman's eyes darted from Daenerys' face to Drogon's immense form. "A Targaryen, with a dragon." Her grip on the spear tightened. "We've heard stories about dragons burning towns, about a city destroyed." Daenerys' chest constricted. King's Landing? Its nightmare still haunted her. She struggled to keep her voice steady. "That was in the past. I came here because I want to save lives, not take them." She reached up, tugging loose a sack of dried grain. "Let me show you." The woman hesitated, then slowly lowered her spear. She glanced over her shoulder at the watching villagers. At last she stepped closer, eyes scanning the cargo, and then flickering to Daenerys' expression. "If you bring us food, we won't turn you away." A note of relief crept into her tone, as if she feared this was a dream that would vanish in a flurry of snow. Daenerys nodded, exhaling. "Let's get these supplies under shelter before the storm intensifies. Then we can talk properly." With the help of a few brave souls, she unfastened the harness from Drogon and began ferrying sacks and barrels into the communal hall. It was dimly lit by a single hearth, and the smell of smoke mingled with the pungent odor of salted fish. Families huddled around small piles of embers, their faces itched with fatigue. Daenerys directed them to the barrels of dried meat and the casks of clean water. Some wept openly, scooping handfuls of grain as though they couldn't believe it was real. Daenerys felt a lump in her throat. This, she thought, was the side of conquest no one spoke about, the small, out-of-the-way places that were left to starve and freeze while lords and kings waged wars. The tall woman introduced herself as Freya. She explained that the settlement was known as Frostshore, one of the farthest inhabited points along the shivering sea. Once, they traded fish and whale oil for grain, with merchants from White Harbor. But after the wars, trade routes faltered. The storms became harsher this year, blocking the few vessels that might dare the seas. Their stored supplies ran out. Some families tried to trek south, never to be seen again. Those who stayed had been praying for any kind of miracle. And now, inexplicably, a Targaryen on a dragon had appeared. Daenerys knelt by the hearth, helping stir a pot of water into which the villagers poured handfuls of grain. "It won't be the feast of a great haul, but it'll keep you alive until more supplies arrive," she said softly. Freya nodded, stirring the pot. Tears glistened in her eyes, though she kept her expression stoic. Around them, children peeked out, curiosity momentarily eclipsing fear, drawn by the possibility of a warm meal and this mysterious silver-haired stranger. Outside, Drogon rested in the snow, occasionally raising his head to watch the edge of the village. Many of the townsfolk were too terrified to approach him, but a few dared to move closer, entranced by his sheer size and the heat that radiated from his scales. One small boy, no older than 5, toddled forward, arms outstretched, wanting to feel the warmth. His mother tried to tug him back, but Drogon merely blinked, giving a low rumble that sounded almost gentle. After a tense moment, the boy giggled, stepping into the area of snow that melted around Drogon's body. Daenerys, who had come to check on her mount, smiled, relieved that the villagers were beginning to understand. Drogon was not here to burn their homes. Night fell swiftly, bringing another gust of icy wind that rattled the roof shingles. Daenerys was offered a spot near the hearth in the communal hall, though it was cramped. The people insisted, with shy gratitude, that she take a warmer spot than the rest, a mark of respect for the one who had saved them from starvation. She accepted only after ensuring the sick and elderly were taken care of. That night, she dozed fitfully, haunted by memories of her earlier conquests. She remembered Astapor, Yonkai, Meereen, how she had liberated slaves and received their adoration. She remembered King's Landing, the city she had thought to liberate, but instead annihilated in a storm of dragonfire. Now here she was, in this tiny village, delivering grain. No adoring crowds, no grand illusions. Just a quiet relief in the eyes of these desperate people. Somehow, that felt more meaningful than any conquered throne. By morning, the villagers had already formed a makeshift queue to receive their portion of grain and dried meat. Daenerys helped direct the distribution, ensuring fairness. Some men tried to jostle for a larger share, but Freya put a stop to it with sharp words and the threat of Daenerys' dragon if they refused to obey. That seemed to quell any unruly behavior. Daenerys wondered if fear was still her currency, even when she yearned for acceptance. But at least it kept these people alive. Later that day, she learned of a handful of huts perched further along the rocky coast, where a few fisherfolk struggled to survive. Worried that they might not know of the supplies, Daenerys decided to investigate. She mounted Drogon, who had regained his vigor after a day's rest, and flew low over the cliffs. Sharp winds buffeted them, making the flight precarious. She spotted 3 huts on a promontory jutting into the sea. The waves below churned with ice and brine, threatening to smash anything that ventured too close. A thin trail wound down from the huts to a small cove, but it was half buried in snow. Drogon landed on a narrow shelf of rock behind the huts, where the cliff provided some shelter from the worst gusts. Daenerys dismounted carefully, stepping across ice-slick stones to knock on the door of the first hut. After a tense moment, the door cracked open to reveal a gaunt-faced man with a patchy beard. Upon seeing Daenerys, and the dragon behind her, his eyes went wide. She once again explained her mission, holding out a small pouch of dried fish and grain as proof. The man's voice shook as he called for his wife and child. Tears sprang to their eyes at the sight of food. They invited Daenerys inside, though the cramped space barely accommodated her. A single glance around told her how dire their situation was. The hearth was empty, no fuel left to burn. Their blankets were ragged, and the child's cheeks were sunken with hunger. She quickly handed them her own fur blanket, ignoring their protests. Then she promised to bring them extra supplies from the communal hall, though it would mean multiple trips back and forth on Drogon. They cried in gratitude, pressing her hands between theirs. As she left the hut and moved to remount Drogon, a fierce gust of wind slammed into her. She stumbled on a patch of ice. Her foot slipped, and she felt her body lurch sideways, sliding toward the jagged drop-off. Rocks tumbled beneath her. With a startled cry, she grasped at the slick ground, failing to find a hold. The sea roared below. Panic flared hot in her chest. Would this be her end, to fall onto the rocks below? At that instant, Drogon let out a bellow, lunging forward. One of his massive claws scraped over the ice, catching Daenerys around the waist with surprising delicacy, drawing her back to safety. She clung to the warm scales, heart hammering. Snow swirled around them, stinging her eyes. Slowly, she caught her breath, pressing her forehead against Drogon's forelimb in silent gratitude. She whispered a shaky laugh. "Thank you," she murmured. "You saved me again." The dragon exhaled a puff of hot air, almost in response. In that moment, Daenerys felt more than a bond of rider and mount. She felt a raw, protective devotion from Drogon. Their tie was no longer solely about conquest or even motherly affection. It was about survival, trust, and a fragile new beginning. The memory of King's Landing still loomed over her like a vengeful ghost. But here, on this icy cliff, she chose to believe that she had finally taken a real step toward the redemption she had once doubted was possible. Over the next 2 days, Daenerys made several trips between Frostshore and the outlying huts along the coast, ferrying basic supplies and helping gather driftwood that Drogon could heat with careful bursts of flame, enough to dry it out for burning, but not so hot as to set the entire stockpile ablaze. The villagers watched, transfixed, as the dragon carefully breathed controlled streams of fire, warming their salvaged wood so they could keep their hearths lit. The children even dared to laugh and play in the snow around him, drawn by his warmth and his looming presence. Daenerys' heart lightened at the sound of their laughter. This was the opposite of how children had cowered in terror during the final days of her war. On the afternoon of the third day, while Daenerys was distributing some herbs for a family suffering from winter cough, she caught sight of figures approaching from the south. It was the relief convoy from Winterfell and beyond, hauling sleds laden with additional supplies. Grey Worm led a handful of Unsullied, while northern soldiers followed. They had traveled arduously through snowdrifts and frozen trails, but they made it. The villagers erupted in subdued cheers, their relief obvious. More fires were lit, and a small feast was prepared in the communal hall, a watery stew, bolstered with the new provisions. Daenerys and Grey Worm stood together, sipping hot broth from clay cups, gazing at the families who now had a better chance to survive the winter. Grey Worm nodded. "You have done them a great kindness. In the past, we might have simply let them fend for themselves." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "This is different." Daenerys smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be different. We can't keep repeating the same mistakes." He studied her with a gentle respect. She knew he too bore the scars of war and the memory of Missandei's loss. Perhaps in these small acts of compassion, he found a sense of purpose that went beyond the battlefield. That evening, the villagers built a larger bonfire on the outskirts of Frostshore, near a rock outcrop that shielded it from the wind. Men and women gathered around, passing cups of warmed ale and sharing what little they had. Some of the more courageous youth crept close to Drogon, who lay coiled not far from the flames, belly scales pressed to the snow, his eyes half-lidded in quiet watchfulness. Daenerys noticed that no one was truly relaxed. Hunger and cold had worn them down too much for true revelry, but there was a cautious optimism in the air. Freya approached Daenerys near the bonfire, her breath steaming in the cold. "We owe you our lives," she said, voice cracking slightly. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." Daenerys drew her cloak tighter around herself. "Just live," she said softly. "Make it through this winter, and then look to rebuild in the spring. The realm is changing, and we need people like you to keep hope alive." Freya nodded, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "We will. If you ever need us, we'll answer your call, as best we can." Daenerys squeezed her hand, mindful of the calluses and cracks in Freya's skin, a mark of the harsh life here. "Then that's enough." A day later, with the supplies fully distributed and the promise of continued support from the north, Daenerys deemed her mission complete. She left Grey Worm and the soldiers behind to help the villagers fortify their huts against the worst of the storms and ensure no immediate crises remained. Then she mounted Drogon once more, bidding the people farewell. They watched as the dragon rose into the icy sky, the orange glow of the morning sun glinting off his black scales. Some waved, others bowed their heads. The memory of their haggard faces and the faint smiles of the children stayed with Daenerys as she soared south, a quiet sense of fulfillment taking root in her chest. It took her less time to return as the winds favored her path. High above the white wilderness, she saw the sun cutting through scattered clouds, sending rays across endless snowfields. The flight felt more peaceful than any she could recall in recent years. Each beat of Drogon's wings resonated with a sense of shared purpose. She reached Winterfell by midday, gliding over the familiar towers and ramparts. As she descended, she spotted Bran in the courtyard, as if waiting for her. When Drogon landed, she slid down and walked toward him, heart still light with the knowledge that she had saved an entire settlement from doom. Bran's gaze held curiosity. "I felt relief emanating from you and Drogon, a sense of accomplishment. You succeeded." Daenerys nodded, cheeks still flushed from the cold. "Yes. We got there in time. People in Frostshore have a fighting chance now." "Ah." A subtle smile curved Bran's lip. "You've done something good, Daenerys. A small settlement, far from any seat of power, was saved, that echoes more loudly than you might imagine." She let out a quiet breath. "I hope so. They deserve more than just survival, but at least they won't starve this winter." Bran tilted his head. "Each act of mercy, each kindness, they add up. You're forging a new legacy separate from the ashes of King's Landing." She stood before him, feeling a swell of gratitude and humility at once. The old Daenerys might have basked in the notion of forging a new legacy, but now she simply felt relief that she hadn't failed these people. "Thank you for trusting me to do it." He reached out and she took his hand lightly. Their bond felt as natural as breathing, underpinned by Drogon's slumbering presence, by the old god's silent watch, and by their shared resolve. Perhaps the realm was still fragile, riddled with old wounds, but in this moment, she believed they stood on the cusp of a kinder era, one shaped not by a single queen's iron will, but by cooperation, compassion, and the willingness to see even the most remote villagers as worthy of aid. In the months that followed, Daenerys continued to work alongside Bran and Sansa, tackling the myriad challenges of a realm still recovering from war. She found herself traveling less frequently on Drogon's back for martial displays, and more often for errands of mercy or diplomatic visits. Some lords stubbornly clung to their old grievances, but many softened when they saw her efforts to support rather than dominate. News of her rescue mission to Frostshore spread in whispers. Here was a Targaryen who came to save, not to burn, riding the same dragon that once set a city aflame. Skeptics abounded, but the stories planted seeds of doubt in those who believed her irredeemable. In Winterfell, Daenerys learned more about northern culture. She joined Sansa in distributing provisions to local villages, accompanied by Unsullied who marched in careful peacekeeping formations rather than battle lines. She participated in harvest festivals, modest affairs compared to the grand feasts of old, where the small folk presented the first gleanings of barley or turnips. Sometimes, she would bring Drogon to the edge of a field, using controlled bursts of fire to clear snowdrifts, or to warm the frozen earth so early planting might take root. The Watchers called her the Dragon Blessed, with a mixture of awe and lingering caution. Bran, for his part, remained the guiding pillar. He navigated the politics of the lords, leveraged alliances, and used his green's ear visions to avert potential disasters, from floods to crop failures. Yet Daenerys sensed he was not content to be a mere politician. He spent hours in the Godswood, drifting into the Weirwood dream, exploring the shifting tapestry of magic that now flowed through Westeros. Sometimes he would speak cryptically of stirring forces, of possible new alliances with regions once thought lost. Daenerys listened, trusting his insight but seldom pressed for details unless he offered them. She respected that mysterious part of him, the boy turned raven, turned king, who saw so much yet carried it all with eerie composure. And always, Drogon remained at the heart of their unspoken pact. He accepted Daenerys' gentle leadership in day-to-day tasks, soared proudly whenever she mounted him for a necessary flight, and welcomed Bran's presence in his mind during the meditations in the Godswood. It was as though the dragon's immense spirit was nourished, by both the motherly devotion Daenerys offered and the calm, ancient magic Bran possessed. If Daenerys ever wondered which bond Drogon valued more, she found no jealousy in her heart. They had come too far for that. What mattered was that Drogon remained free, and that he helped heal, rather than harm, the land. Over time, rumors began to swirl of Daenerys' intentions. Would she stay in the north forever? Would she attempt to reclaim the Iron Throne if King's Landing was fully rebuilt? Some whispered about a marriage alliance between her and Bran. Though such speculation seemed fanciful, Bran's life was dedicated to the realm's spiritual and political care, and Daenerys had not shown any desire for a new marriage. Still, the gossip spread, fueled by the idea that uniting Targaryen and Stark in a formal union would solidify the realm's peace. Daenerys ignored the rumors, focusing on the day's tasks, but occasionally she caught Sansa's knowing look, or Guard's sly grin. She dismissed these with a shake of her head. She and Bran had a bond beyond what most could comprehend, but it was not of the romantic kind they imagined. The months gave way to the promise of spring. The sun grew stronger, melting snowdrifts and turning the fields into patches of muddy brown. Even the godswood took on a softer aspect, its red leaves vibrant in the milder air. People across the north looked forward to a season of recovery. Caravans from the south brought building materials, seeds, and the possibility of more stable trade routes. Roads once impassable were cleared. The realm's battered infrastructure began to mend, slowly but surely. One afternoon, Daenerys and Bran stood on the ramparts, looking out over the thawing landscape. Sansa had departed on a diplomatic visit to the Riverlands, trusting them to oversee Winterfell in her absence. The courtyard below buzzed with activity, carts unloading supplies, blacksmiths repairing tools, farmers leading scrawny cows out to graze. Children ran along the walls, squealing in delight at the patches of sunshine. Drogon lounged in the far corner, half dozing, soaking in the warmth that melted snow around him. Daenerys let out a contented sigh, resting her forearms on the stone parapet. It's strange to see the north without thick snow everywhere. I almost forgot what the earth looks like under all that white. Bran's voice was gentle. Seasons change and so do people. This is the first true spring the north has had since the War for the Dawn. She glanced at him, his posture relaxed in his wheeled chair, but his eyes still carrying that timeless depth. You've guided everyone through it. Without you, the realm might have torn itself apart. He looked away, brow creased. I've done what I could, but it's not solely me. The realm heals because of many hands. Because of leaders choosing mercy. Because of people willing to set aside grudges. You've played no small part in that. Where? A faint flush warmed her cheeks. I only did what needed to be done. I can't erase the past. He turned to her fully, meeting her gaze. No one can erase the past, but you can build a future that honors the lessons learned. You've done that, and I believe you'll continue to. She felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, remembering the broken spires of King's Landing, the rubble and ash. But also remembering the children of Frostshaw, the outlaws who surrendered in the Stormlands, the small triumphs that had shaped her life since. She nodded. Yes, that's what I want. They watched as a flock of ravens passed overhead, cawing into the mild breeze. Drogon shifted in the courtyard, lifting his head to observe them. Perhaps he sensed Bran's presence in their midst, or maybe he simply found them intriguing. Daenerys brushed her wind-blown hair aside, gazing at her dragon's regal silhouette against the brightening sky. She smiled to herself, thinking of how improbable it all was. Her, a Targaryen who had once marched west in fury, now bound in peace with a Stark king and a black dragon who served both their wills, forging a realm that might finally know a gentler hand on the reins of power. A messenger raced through the gates below, dismounting in haste. Daenerys and Bran watched as the messenger spoke with a guard, then was directed into the great hall. Bran pursed his lips. Let's see what tidings he brings. Daenerys nodded, curiosity mingling with a sense of cautious anticipation. She followed Bran down into the hall, where the messenger knelt, breathless, before them. He bore the sigil of House Arryn on his tunic. Your Graces, he gasped. I come from the Vale with urgent news. Lord Royce requests immediate assistance. a host of raiders, some from the mountains of the moon. Others rumored to be fleeing Lannister loyalists are attacking Vale villages. They've taken advantage of the melting snow to launch raids. House Aaron's forces are stretched thin. They beg the king in the north and the Targaryen queen to lend aid, lest more. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Daenerys glanced at Bran, reading the inevitable question in his eyes. Another crisis, another threat to stability. She felt no thrill at the thought of conflict, but she recognized it as part of the realm's ongoing healing process. There would always be pockets of violence, desperate men who turned to brigandage when their lives were upended. She squared her shoulders, steeling herself for another mission to preserve peace. Bran's voice cut through the hush. "Tell Lord Royce we will do what we can. He will not stand alone. Prepare a raven with details. We'll dispatch help promptly." The messenger bowed, relief evident on his face. Daenerys took a slow breath. Here then was the next test. She would go, she decided. Drogon's presence might scatter these raiders, just as it had in the Stormlands. But she would tread carefully, avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. She turned to Bran. Their gazes locked. "I'll leave at dawn," she said quietly. "I'll bring a contingent of Unsullied and Northern Knights. If Drogon and I can end these raids with minimal violence, we'll do it." Bran nodded, his expression sober. "Let it be so, and may this be one more step toward protecting the realm rather than subjugating it." She placed a hand on his arm, drawing strength from his calm. "I vow to make it so." When the dawn came, grey and soft, Daenerys once again prepared Drogon for flight. Once again, she carried the burden of deciding how to use this fearsome power. And once again, she lifted into the sky with a determined heart. Below, the armies of men marched, their banners flapping in the cool spring breeze. She felt none of the old hunger for conquest, only a resolve to protect the fragile peace that had sprouted in the wake of so much death. As Drogon's wings swept over Winterfell's walls, Daenerys gazed down at the shape of Bran in his wheeled chair, tiny from this height, but so integral to her journey. He had given her a chance to redeem herself, to forge a different path for her dragon and her destiny. She intended to honor that chance with every breath. Fire and blood had once defined House Targaryen, but now her flames would serve as a beacon, not a torch of ruin. She urged Drogon onward, the horizon opening before them like the blank pages of a new history waiting to be written. The Vale lay ahead, steeped in its own perils, but also impossibility. And beyond that, so many other corners of Westeros could benefit from this new alliance of dragon and raven, Targaryen and Stark. Perhaps the rest of the world, too, would come to see that even the fiercest flames could be tempered by compassion. Onward she flew, Drogon's roar echoing across the sky, a clarion call that said the days of reckless conquest were gone. In their place stood a partnership, unlikely yet powerful, bound by the vow that no one would ever again suffer by the dragon's flame, only be guarded by its warmth. And so the realm turned a page, guided by the king who saw all, the queen who chose mercy, and the last living dragon who found its truest purpose in their shared bond.